Materialism/physicalism, mistaking explanation for experience. Materialism is the reigning grown-up in the room. It points to telescopes and MRIs, chips and vaccines, fusion reactors and flight, and says, look what happens when you take matter seriously. It promises a universe that is legible without magic. Parts, laws, interactions, emergent patterns. No ghosts in the machine because there is no machine for ghosts to haunt. If every phenomenon is, in the end, a rearrangement of stuff and the forces between it, then mystery is simply a backlog. And yet the backlog has a stubborn file at the top, experience. Not behavior, not function, not reportable outputs, but the felt bloom of being, a sting of pain, the private redness of red, the taste of strawberry, the way shame lives in the chest. Materialism explains mechanisms with astonishing success. The charge here is that it confuses such explanation for the thing explained, especially when the thing is what it's like from the inside. Think of 3 pictures that materialism loves to draw. Picture 1, the finished map. You wake, you see red, you reach. Neuroscience shows a cascade: photons, retina, V1 neurons, inferotemporal cortex, motor plans. We can predict your reach from your brain state and even stimulate a patch to shift the color you report. The map is exquisite, but when you ask where in this picture is what red is like, the map grows shy. It shows correlations and causal roles. It does not display the subjective redness any more than a city map shows the smell of rain on its streets. Picture 2, the explained illusion. Perhaps the feel is a trick. Pain, color, the continuity of a self over time. Illusions manufactured by evolved brains for control and prediction. But an illusion is still experienced. Calling pain merely neural signaling doesn't make pain pleasant. Like declaring the self a construct doesn't answer the person asking why they should keep a promise. Illusion talk can be clarifying about origins. It does not dissolve the what it is like. Just is doing too much work. Picture 3, the identity claim. Maybe the feel is the firing. Your experience of red is identical to this neural pattern. Identities can be surprising. Water is H2O, lightning is electrical discharge. But those identities become persuasive because both sides of the equation share a public face. We can move between macro and micro descriptions and keep track of the properties. With experience, the bridge is different. Third-person descriptions of mechanisms and first-person presence do not obviously commute. You can know every public fact about the brain and still learn something new the first time you taste mango. The classic thought experiments press the bruise. Mary learns all physical facts about color in a black and white room. Stepping out, she learns what red is like. Zombies behave like us molecule for molecule, but by stipulation, nobody's home, conceivable without contradiction, which suggests that physical story and conscious feel can come apart in principle. You can dislike these scenarios, but their durability points to the same gap. Explanation of structure and function is not the same as presence. Materialism's defense is often to flip the burden. What else could experiences be made of? We reject spooky stuff. Give us time. Science closes gaps. Fair. But notice that this reply quietly changes the target, from the conceptual gap between function and feel to a temporal gap in research. The critique here isn't, you haven't finished the project. It's, your method, as stated, may be the wrong kind of project to capture the target. 3 additional leaks widen the hole. 1, aboutness, intentionality. Thoughts are about things. A sentence on a page can be about Paris only because a reader supplies the aboutness. Neurons fire, patterns propagate. Where in the physics is about? Reductionists respond with representational theories, predictive processing, teleosemantics. These are promising, and yet the last move always seems to smuggle meaning in by a backdoor labeled use or fitness. We recover function. We do not obviously recover norms of correctness. This belief is false from ions and spikes alone. 2, normativity, the ought. Material descriptions tell us how systems tend to evolve. They do not tell us what should happen. We can naturalize narrow oughts. Thermostats ought to keep the set point, but moral and epistemic oughts bite differently. If you ought not torture cashes out as cooperation produced fitness, then the person who gains by cruelty can reply, thanks for the history. A purely descriptive inventory struggles to anchor obligation without slipping into pragmatics or preference. 3, reason and self-trust. If every belief is the output of causes indifferent to truth, why trust any belief, including materialism? Evolutionary debunking often ricochets. Of course, brains are physical systems. Of course, causes matter. But unless the world also contains truth-tracking norms, unless reason is more than neuron arithmetic, self-undermining whispers at the edge of the story, from these tensions grow familiar patches. Emergetism. Consciousness is a higher-level property realized by lower-level stuff. Maybe. Yet either emergence is just shorthand for complexity and the hard problem remains, or it carries novel causal powers and the causal closure of physics wobbles. Illusionism. There are no qualia, we only seem to have them. This reframes the target, but at the cost of speaking a language that ordinary pain cannot hear. A theory that calls screams data structures complaining may be tidy, it risks moral anesthesia. Type B materialism. There is an identity. We just can't see it a priori. Perhaps, but then the view becomes faith in a future bridge rather than a current account of how the bridge is even possible. So what survives the critique? Plenty. Materialism's explanatory discipline is non-negotiable. Do not multiply entities beyond necessity. Do not use mystery when mechanism suffices. Do not put angels on every gap. But we also need a repair kit that stops the theory from erasing its own subject. A humbler materialism, 5 commitments. 1. Multi-level realism. Permit that different descriptive levels are real and not merely convenient. Hearts pump blood because of molecules. They are hearts in a way molecules are not. Likewise, minds may be realized by brains without being exhausted by neuronal vocabulary. Nothing over and above physics, something other than physics talk. 2. Bridging laws, not bravado. Expect lawful links between neural organization and experience, e.g., measures of integration or global availability, but call them what they are, bridges that connect heterogeneous kinds. A bridge acknowledges difference even as it spans it. 3. First-person data is data. Train reports, not to replace scans, but to calibrate them. Phenomenological methods, careful psychophysics, even contemplative disciplines can stabilize the target we're trying to map. If a seismograph ignores the ground, it's precise and useless. 4. Norms are real constraints. Treat truth, meaning, and value as second-order realities that emerge with agents and then constrain them. A promise once made changes the possible futures in a way no molecule alone describes. This is not magic. It is acknowledging that persons introduce new kinds of fact. 5. Ethical non-reduction. Let pain be more than nociception and depression more than serotonin. Use biology to heal. Refuse vocabularies that make lived suffering a lab error. If the map edits out the person, fix the map. A few self-checks if you lean hard materialist. Do you ever say just chemicals, just neurons, where the lived stakes scream don't? When models fit behavior, do you assume the feel is now accounted for or only now predictable? When you call a value nothing but preference, are you explaining it or disarming it? And if you recoil into mystery, do you use consciousness as a fog that stops questions or as a target that demands better ones? Are you smuggling physics back in whenever you want to build a bridge, from prayer to anesthesia, from memory to trauma, while denouncing it elsewhere? Where does this leave us? With a picture less triumphant and more two-eyed. One eye sees mechanisms clearly. Ion channels, predictive coding, network dynamics, learning curves. The other refuses to forget the presence that mechanisms ride on, the lighted interior where pain hurts, music matters, and reasons move us. Close either eye and the world flattens into mysticism that cannot build a bridge or into a science that cannot admit it's standing on one. Materialism's major flaw is not cruelty or stupidity, it is impatience. The urge to declare that a functional story is a phenomenal story because functional stories are what we know how to write. The cure is patience with plurality. Keep building the maps, keep honoring the terrain, and stop mistaking one for the other. When we finally have a theory worthy of experience, it will not be because we talk the redness out of red, but because we learned how a world of matter can also be a world that shows up to someone. Idealism, the everyone else problem. Idealism flips the common sense picture. Mind isn't inside the world is inside mind. Tables, trees, traffic are not mind-independent furniture, but appearances in or productions of consciousness. It's a seductive correction to dead matter metaphysics. Instead of asking how awareness erupts out of atoms, ask how atoms are patterns in awareness. No more hard problem, experience is fundamental. Elegance achieved, embarrassment avoided. and yet a large, stubborn file lands on the desk. Everyone else. The central bruise. Other minds and shared constraint. If reality is mind-made or mind-manifest, why does it not obey me? Why do you keep resisting my will like furniture? Why does the world keep secrets I do not choose, spring surprises I would never script, and punish mistakes I sincerely didn't mean to make? More pointedly, how do your experiences ever get purchase on my reality such that we can check, correct, and coordinate? Materialists face the hard problem. Idealists face the hard public. The very things that make a world workable, error correction, prediction, joint projects, science, depend on objects that push back regardless of what any single mind prefers. Idealism often answers by enlarging the circle. It's not my mind, it's mind, or a field of minds, or an intersubjective web. But then the question returns with interest. What grounds this shared constraint so that it's not just a poetic relabeling of mind independence? 3 recurring patches and their leaks. 1. The single sovereign mind, Berkeley's God. To stabilize appearances and synchronize viewpoints, posit an infinite perceiver who guarantees regularity. Rain falls for me and you because God streams the same content to both. Leak. This rescues order by outsourcing it to an invisible umpire. Explanatory work is done by a being whose independent reliability we must assume, smuggling mind independence back in a robe. 2. Many minds in a lawful field, intersubjective idealism. Reality is a rule-bound interaction space among subjects. Constraints are the grammar of co-appearance. Leak. Either the grammar is contingent, then why so unforgivingly stable, or it is necessary, in which case you've posited an objective structure that behaves awfully like a non-mental law. 3. Reality equals information. Mind reads it. Phenomenal information idealism. What's real is experiential information. Physics describes regularities in that information. Leak. Information about what and for whom. Information without a substrate that resists is just formatted dream, and if the substrate is mind, we're back to the public mind question. The explanatoriness test. Idealism often excels at accommodation. Of course that seems stable, mind is orderly, but stumbles at prediction. Why this spectrum of elements? Why inverse square gravity rather than inverse cube? Why is electron mass what it is, rather than a little kinder to our machines? Material stories can be wrong, but they put their necks under data. Idealist stories tend to fit after the fact by appealing to the taste of mind for elegant math. The toenail test is pettier and harsher. Stubbing your toe hurts whether or not you curated the vibe. An ontology that places mind first must not make resistance sound like etiquette. If it does, it will be profound in lectures and useless in hospitals. The verification problem, not just solipsism. The cheap shot at idealism is solipsism. Sophisticated idealists reject that. They believe in other subjects. The problem is subtler, verification. What counts within the theory as evidence that another perspective corrects mine rather than merely decorates it? In practice, idealists rely on the same public methods everyone else uses. Instruments, replication, math, engineering. But those methods presuppose a world sturdy enough to keep score without consulting each ego. Idealism can license that sturdiness. It must do so without smuggling in hidden matter with a name change. Quantum bait and why it doesn't save the day. Appeals to quantum mechanics are common: measurement, observer, indeterminacy. Tempting, but dangerous. Observer in physics is a physical interaction, not a philosopher's subjectivity. Interference collapses when systems entangle with environments, not when a mind frowns at a detector. You can read quantum phenomena idealistically if you wish, but the math does not require it. Using physics as a permission slip for metaphysics risks category mistakes on both ends. History's bill. Evolution, pre-minds, deep time. The rocks are old. So are supernova remnants, fossil strata, cosmic background radiation. If world equals mind's display, whose mind was being catered to for the 13.8 billion year prelude before critters with cortex arrived? The classical answer, again God, buys consistency at the cost of adding a vast, uncheckable agency. The contemporary answer, mind as fundamental field, rebrands the cosmos but leaves the directionality of evolution, its specific, painful, contingent gropings, looking suspiciously like the kind of story you tell when the world isn't authored. Ethics under glass. If reality is mind-built, it's easy for the careless version of idealism to turn suffering into presentation issues, reframings, awakenings, better interpretations. Yet injustice involves bodies that bruise, debts that bind, institutions that persist across lifetimes. When idealist talk drifts toward change your consciousness to change your world, it risks excusing power by aestheticizing pain. Any viable idealism must keep a hard edge for non-negotiable harms. A steel man idealism, what's worth keeping. Idealism's gift is to block a lazy reduction that treats persons as mere chemistry. Its insistence that appearance to someone is not a trivial afterthought is a permanent correction. If we're to salvage that insight without drowning in dream logic, the view needs handles. 1. Intersubjective realism. Take the shared world as primitive, a law-governed field in which subjects participate, not a whim canvas. Minds disclose it under constraints they do not author. If you call the field mind, you owe an account of why it behaves like a stern schoolmaster, not a poet. 2. Embodiment as non-optional. Treat bodies and brains as the way minds couple to constraint, not as optional avatars. Under anesthesia, the display collapses. Trauma reshapes the display against will. This keeps idealism honest about medicine, disability, and the slow repair of persons. 3. Bridging practices, not slogans. Phenomenology to refine descriptions, science to test and build, ethics to set limits. Don't let consciousness is fundamental end conversations. Let it fund more careful ones about measurement, first-person methods, and placebo-proof compassion. 4. Asymmetry of will. Admit that most of reality is non-editable by declaration. The whole point of a common world is that it embarrasses us into learning. An idealism that cannot say no to the self turns spiritual quickly and political never. 5. Public criteria for truth. Retain replication, prediction, and engineering as non-negotiable filters. If your version of mind can't build bridges and fix sewers, you're doing metaphysics as mood board. Self-checks for idealists. When someone corrects you with a measurement, do you reach for but consciousness as a veto or as a prompt to refine how appearances mislead? Do you treat suffering as primarily an interpretive failure? If so, you are at risk of cruelty with excellent prose. Does your shared field of consciousness do any predictive work before looking at data or only tidy up after? Self-checks for their critics. Do you dismiss the first person as noise because it's hard to measure? Then you've confused difficult with dispensable. Do you assume public constraint explains presence? Then you're swapping one gap, public verification, for another. Why, it's like anything at all. The flaw, then, is not that idealism honors mind. It's that it too often treats mind as a sovereign rather than a citizen of a rule-bound republic of appearances. The world we inhabit is resistant, communal, graded by error, and older than any single perspective. A defensible idealism must love that world enough to let it win most arguments, while insisting rightly that whatever wins must still appear to someone. Keep that double demand, and mind first becomes a lens that clarifies, not a wand that excuses. Cartesian dualism, two worlds that never met. Dualism begins with a sting most people recognize. The body seems too blunt to hold what it feels like to be you. Flesh is weight, temperature, position. The self is meanings, memories, intentions, shame. Descartes drew a line to protect that feeling, extended matter on one side, thinking substance on the other. He meant to rescue dignity from the gears of physics. He built a border so high that the rescued could no longer come home. The first failure is contact. If mind has no mass, no momentum, no coordinates, how does it move a finger? Every push in the physical world must show up on an instrument. If thoughts do work, where's the trace? And if no trace appears, if neurons always close the causal books by themselves, then willing becomes a dubbed soundtrack over motions already decided. Dualism promises sovereignty and delivers a balcony seat. The soul watches the body act and applauds on delay. The second failure is dependence. A milligram of fentanyl hushes a cathedral of intentions. A clot in the middle cerebral artery turns a fluent vow into fragments. An electrode in the amygdala manufactures dread. Anesthetic silences consciousness without asking. If the true self lives elsewhere, why does kitchen chemistry overthrow it? Development ties awakening to growth. Dementia ties identity to decay. Injury maps meanings onto matter with cartographer's precision. Damage here and color drains from the world. Damage there and faces become masks. Damage elsewhere and guilt forgets its name. The doctrine meant to dignify experience ends up insulting it, as if the mind's sacred work were optional to the tissue that so obviously carries it. The third failure is loneliness. When the real me is placed outside space, every meeting becomes a metaphor. Bodies touch, essences cannot. If my mind is a private light and yours is another, what do we actually share? Dualism saves souls and loses neighbors. Empathy turns into guesswork, intimacy into faith, grief into a story we tell because the only real connections were always off stage. A philosophy built to honor the person quietly makes persons unreachable. Still, the view refuses to die. It survives in scripture, in superstition, and in the mouths of people who swear by science, until a parent dies. Then the grammar changes. She's gone, but I feel her. Dualism is a protest against humiliation, the humiliation of being all biology, of love reduced to voltage and guilt to chemistry and death to unplugging. It insists there is more. The trouble is that it gives that more no handles, no hinges, no lawful bridge back to the blood that bleeds when the more is wounded. The classic repair was to point at a place. Descartes chose the pineal gland, a location, not an interface. Later repairs shifted strategy. Occasionalism outsourced every interaction to God. No handshake, only a universal middleman. Epiphenomenalism surrendered causation. Mind rides the machinery like a film with no influence on the projector. Property dualism kept one substance and added two kinds of property, physical and phenomenal, but left the question of mental causation haunted. Dual aspect monism promised one underlying stuff seen two ways, physical from without and experiential from within, while leaving the bridging laws as promissory notes. Each move softens the scandal and pays for it with vagueness. Evidence keeps refusing to float. Consciousness depends on circulation, oxygenation, arousal nuclei. Language depends on certain parasylvian loops. Moral learning bends with the striatum's plasticity. Trauma imprints the amygdala and hippocampus like a stamp. The more closely we look, the more the I appears as a living pattern in tissue, fragile, plastic, lawfully alterable, neither reducible to a molecule nor detachable from the molecule's choreography. Even our miracles work this way. Psychotherapy rewires circuits. Deep brain stimulation lifts a depression. Meditation thickens attention's muscle. Gratitude practices change sleep and heart rate. The soul that can be cured by a magnet is not an exile. It is a resident. Dualism also tempts cruelty dressed as consolation. If pain is merely physical, suffering can be minimized with a shrug. The real you is untouched. If bodies are vehicles for souls, some bodies become spare parts. Disability is a bad chassis, poverty a cosmetic defect, torture a technicality. A metaphysics meant to protect dignity becomes a way to discount the only creatures whose dignity we are sure of, embodied ones. A politics that imagines persons as drivers of disposable cars will treat some cars as scrap. None of this commits us to a flat reduction. The alternative isn't to call love just dopamine and promise-keeping just prefrontal inhibition. The alternative is a thicker monism, one world, many vocabularies, real bridges. The same event can be described in ions and in intentions, and both descriptions can be true because they track patterns at different scales that constrain each other. A promise once made changes synaptic weights and social futures. A fear once learned teaches networks where to thicken. A reason can move an arm because the organism is built to be reason responsive, to let norms grip neurons through training, language, culture, law, and habit. This view keeps the light inside first class. Pain is not just nociception. Depression is not just serotonin. Those are maps of machinery, not the country of hurt. But the machinery matters precisely because persons are that country in muscle and salt. We owe truth to experience because experience is the thing all the instruments are trying to be about. We owe compassion to bodies because bodies are people. What then remains of dualism that is worth keeping? A posture. Refuse to let explanation drain value. Refuse to let function erase feel. Keep insisting that the first person is not a rounding error, but retire the border. Trade the abyss for a landscape, layered, continuous, cross-braced. Demand explicit bridges, psychophysical regularities you can bet a clinic on, not slogans that declare victory because a sentence felt pure. On this landscape, agency does not break physics. It lives inside it as dance lives inside muscle. Reasons are causes when they are realized in systems trained to honor them. Choice is not a ghostly shove. It is a pattern shift across networks tuned by history and held to account by language and law. Freedom is not exemption from causation. It is the achievement of control within it. Death on this landscape is terrible because body and person go together. That is not an insult to the soul. It is a defense of the one we can reach. It is why hospice matters, why consent matters, why torture is a metaphysical crime, why disability rights are human rights, why climate policy is a moral necessity and not a lifestyle. A philosophy that pretends the floats above the air and water they breathe will always excuse someone's suffering as spiritually trivial. A philosophy that keeps us on the ground will be moved to fix the ground. The fear remains. If we are not two substances, will meaning survive? Yes, if we learn to hear meaning as a mode of organization with teeth. Norms are real constraints, once creatures like us exist. A promise binds because humans, wired for reciprocity and armed with memory and sanction, make futures where breaking it costs. Truth binds because humans trained to track error and rewarded for correction can be ashamed by evidence. These bindings are not illusions. They are additions to the warehouse of causes, invented and enforced by embodied minds. Dualism kept a precious intuition alive. The light inside is not the same kind of thing as a liver. The mistake was to protect the light by exiling it to a second cosmos and then pretending the two could shake hands. We do not need a second cosmos. We need honest bridges, lawful correspondences between patterns of activity and kinds of presence. Practices that let a surgeon and a mourner be right in the same room, institutions that treat harm to flesh as harm to self, and a culture that can talk biochemistry on Monday and forgiveness on Tuesday without lying on either day. Two worlds that never met is not a description of reality. It is an alibi for confusion. One world, many levels, is harder, humbler, and enough. It lets us keep what dualism wanted, dignity, agency, the felt brightness of experience, while giving those goods body. It asks us to love the person where the person actually lives, in breath, in blood, in the slow grammar of reasons learning to move hands. Panpsychism, the combination conundrum. Panpsychism is the gentlest revolution. It refuses the late-night miracle in which experience pops out of insentient matter and instead whispers that matter was never insentient at all. The world is lit from within, everywhere and always. Electrons glimmer with protofeel, molecules hum with micro-perspective, neurons chorus with richer tones. Consciousness on this view isn't an alien perched on physics. It is physics from the inside. No more hard problem, only a gradual brightening from faint sparks to living rooms full of light. But the house does not feel like a million candles. It feels like one room. The bruise at the center is not whether bits could feel a little. It is how they ever become a single someone. This is the combination problem. Mind dust is easy to imagine. A subject is not. How do trillions of proto-experiences, each a private pinprick, fuse into the single, order-bearing I who reads this sentence and tastes the same coffee across sips? Adjacency is not unity. A choir is not one throat. A pile of love letters does not become a marriage. If each micro-entity has its own point of view, laying them side by side does nothing but increase head count. You can write integration, binding, or coherence on the whiteboard. You have not yet explained why there is one experiencer rather than a parliament that never convenes. Without a fusion law, an explicit non-circular account of how subjects merge, panpsychism advertises intimacy and sells crowd scenes. The problem forks. Grain. At what scale do sparks exist? Electrons, atoms, proteins, neurons. If sparks go all the way down, overlapping assemblages should generate overlapping subjects. Your cortex, your liver, your phone in your hand, all causally entangled, each house microsparks. Why aren't you 36 partially superposed people? Pick a grain too fine and the world is a riot of redundant selves. Too coarse and you have quietly reintroduced emergence, the very miracle panpsychism was meant to banish. Boundary. Where do I end? If subjects form when parts interact tightly enough, then my eye should annex my pen when flow state arrives, detach at lunch, half merge with a lover, and briefly include the internet on a good doom scroll. Psychologically, that is not entirely wrong. Metaphysically, it threatens to make personhood a weather report, high integration with scattered showers of identity. An ontology that cannot draw a line risks drawing none. Structure. Even if you postulate fusion, why does the fused subject have these qualities rather than a muddle? The redness of red is not a mosaic of micro-reds. Sweetness is not a lattice of sugar stipples. Combining shapes yields shapes, combining tilts yields vectors. But combining fields, if each field is a point-of-viewed whole, does not obviously yield a new whole of a different kind, rather than a committee of old wholes. Phenomenal bonding is a phrase in search of a physics, causation. If micro-experiences help cause behavior, what prevents double bookkeeping? Either the microphysical story is causally sufficient, in which case the micro-experiential is a passenger, or the experiential does extra work, in which case physics is incomplete in measurable ways. Panpsychists often answer with Russellian monism. Physics gives only structure and relations, while intrinsic natures, consciousness-like, do the pushing. Maybe. But intrinsic natures are, by design, unmeasured. You have cured epiphenomenalism by inventing untestables and then calling them fundamental. Faced with these leaks, many switch to cosmopsychism. Forget fusing insects of consciousness into a person. Start with a cosmic subject that dials itself down into us. One mind first, many later. The combination problem becomes a decombination problem. Why am I not the cosmos? How does the one forget itself into the many on schedule, wake up on Tuesdays as Maria and on Thursdays as Jamal, and then reliably pay taxes? You avoid a million mergers by booking one enormous amnesia. There is also the ethics inflation that panpsychism tempts. If everything feels a little, does everything deserve a little care? A screwdriver with stage fright, a spreadsheet with Monday depression, a storm drain with a low mood? The generous impulse is admirable. The conclusion is paralyzing. Moral life requires triage. If the view cannot articulate why a pig's suffering outranks a pebble's proto-twinge, it will either trivialize pain by spreading it thin, or trivialize compassion by spending it on gravel. Panpsychism's defenders are not naifs. They steel-man themselves. Continuity beats magic. If experience is real, it is less wild to say it never vanishes than that it poofs into being when neurons cross some mysterious threshold. Explanatory symmetry. Physics describes what behaves. Experience is what it is like to be what behaves. Two vocabularies for one world. Anti-chauvinism. The view decenters human brains and grants dignity to non-human life by default. Good gifts. But without handles, they slide. What would a panpsychism with handles look like? A principled selection rule. You need an exclusion principle that picks out exactly one subject from overlapping candidates. The maximal integrated cluster wins is one such attempt. Only the system that integrates information more than any of its parts gets to own a point of view. That dodges mind swarms, but it must cash out integration in physical terms that aren't tuned to the answer. A lawful fusion story. Postulate a specific relation, call it phenomenal convolution, that takes n subjects with structures S1, Sn, and returns a new subject with structure F, S1, Sn under exact conditions C. Handwave here and you are writing myth. Make F and C testable surrogates of observable organization, causal closure, recurrent connectivity, energy flows, and you have at least invited laboratory humiliation, which is how metaphysics graduates to science. A boundary criterion. Tie subjecthood to organismic closure, a living system self-maintaining, prediction-saturated loop with the world. Homeostasis, not adjacency. Autonomy, not mere contact. This draws the line around animals more clearly than around rocks and routers, and it explains why tools feel like extensions without becoming co-owners of your scream. A causal truce. Keep micro-experience as the intrinsic face of the microphysical while refusing extra forces. The mental does not overrule the physical. It is the physical from within, so causal closure remains intact. That sounds like a slogan until you specify which microstructures carry which microfields and how macroorganization maps them into reportable phenomenology. Without the map, the truce is a handshake in the dark, an ethical gradient. Not all experience is equal. Moral considerability should scale with capacity for valenced, unified experience, intensity, complexity, temporal horizon, learning, suffering, avoidance, not with mere possession of proto-spark. A pig beats a pebble, a child beats a tree, a forest beats a fridge. If your ontology cannot say this aloud, your ethics will apologize for cruelty or drown in sentiment. Even outfitted with these tools, the view must face its predictive anemia. What new forecast does panpsychism make about brains, AI, anesthesia, or coma that a careful, non-reductive physicalism cannot? Consciousness is present wherever organization meets criterion K is useful if K is measurable and discriminate. Everything has a side that feels like something, is poetry until you tell me which side, how much, and how you checked. The critic has her own responsibilities. Sneering at mines and rocks is easy. The more important challenge is to explain unity without magic. If experience is absent at the base, how does unified subjectivity appear at any scale? If emergence is your answer, say whether it is just a name for complexity or a law with content. If it is a law, publish it. Humiliation welcome. Where does this leave the gentle revolution? With a choice. It can remain a beautiful refusal, a promise that the world is not dead matter with mind stapled on and accept being a consolation. Or it can become a discipline. Pick a grain, state a fusion law, draw a boundary, respect closure, scale ethics, risk being wrong in public. The first path keeps the warmth, the second keeps the world. The flaw is not tenderness toward reality. It is multiplicity without marriage, sparks without a fire, glimmers without a gaze. To say it's minds all the way down is not yet to say how any level becomes a person who can lose a mother and be changed, or stand in court and be bound, or sit very still and know that red is happening. Until Panpsychism can write that sentence in equations a clinic can use and a lab can break, it will be a lullaby hummed to silence the hard question it set out to face, not how to make matter feel, but how to make many feelings one. In Transcendental Idealism, the locked attic, Kant built a house to save reason from itself. Downstairs, the world of appearances, space and time as the stage, causality as the script, objects as regular guests who obey polite rules. Upstairs, behind a door with no key, things in themselves, reality as it is independently of our lenses. The promise was modest grandeur. Science gets the whole first floor, morality gets a private study, metaphysics stops crashing into the furniture. We keep knowledge, we keep dignity, and we keep our noses out of places we cannot breathe. The flaw is architectural. When you lock the attic, you also lock the roof. When it rains, you cannot check where the leaks come from. Kant calls it phenomena, what appears under the forms of our sensibility and the categories of understanding, versus noumena, what is there, full stop, without us. His system says we're inevitably conditioned. We bring space and time to experience. We synthesize with concepts like substance and cause. We are the co-authors of the scene. That's the courage. The problem is what he does next. He makes the outside illegal to discuss and then smuggles it back in as a necessity. You can hear the smuggling in a single sentence. We are affected by things in themselves. Affected as in caused. But causation, he says, only legitimately applies within appearances. So noumena both must and must not push. They are the source of what strikes our senses, and they are barred from entering the court where causes get sworn. Kant calls this a limit concept. Critics call it a contradiction dressed in robes. The attic isn't just locked, it's haunted by footprints. There is a second wobble, the provinciality of the forms. Space and time, for us, are Euclidean and absolute enough to structure the possibility of experience. Synthetic a priori truths, geometry, Newtonian structure, are supposed to be necessary. Then history happens. Non-Euclidean geometries fit our best physics. Simultaneity depends on frames. Mass and energy exchange vows. Quantum events laugh at classical causality. The critical lesson that the mind contributes structure survives. The catalog of necessary structures does not. What Kant wrote as furniture looks more like scaffolding. Useful, revisable, sometimes replaced. A theory that promised to capture the permanent conditions of experience turns out to have captured the 18th century. Third, the two worlds allergy and the two aspects cure. Kant himself wavered, commentators still argue. Two worlds reading. There are appearances and there are things in themselves, ontologically distinct occupant. Two aspects reading. There is one reality under two descriptions, considered in relation to our cognitive constitution, phenomenal or not, noumenal, with no extra furniture upstairs. The first reading begets the affection paradox. The second risks triviality. Noumenal becomes whatever facts would be true independently, which helps little. Either way, the attic door is a dramatization of a true humility. Our grip on the world is always mediated. But the dramatization misleads. It makes mediation sound like barrier, not bridge. Then there is the moral annex. Kant tries to buy back the upstairs via practical reason. We must think of ourselves as free, must postulate God and immortality as moral furniture, regulative, not constitutive. So duty has a horizon. This is beautiful in its restraint and brittle in its confidence. Freedom becomes a practical necessity that theory is forbidden to inspect. Dignity becomes an infinite worth that empirical life repeatedly contradicts. When rigor descends without context, it can harden into cruelty. Intentions scrubbed clean of consequence, duties unbent by circumstance, persons an end in themselves in sentences and a problem in hospitals. Transcendental idealism also breeds a distinctive quietism. It clothes itself as peace, don't speculate beyond experience, and too often cashes out as timidity. Where the world demands metaphysical bets on mind, on value, on the real reach of explanation, Kant's heirs retreat into as if. Use laws as if nature were unified. Act as if freedom were secure. Speak as if there were meaning beyond price. The as if can be a wise brace. It can also be a velvet gag. A culture that lives too long in as if will discover that power happily decides the rest. Against all this, defenders will say you are missing the gift. Kant's point is not to wall us off from reality, but to stop us from confusing our tools with the world's bones, to explain why science works without pretending it peers behind God's curtain, to give morality a backbone that money and monsters cannot buy. True, and that gift endures. The critique here is that the house's beams twist under their own conditions. Consider 4 pressure points that keep returning. Affection without causation. If things in themselves are conditions for sensation, they stand in a relation our categories forbid. If they do not, experience floats. You can rename the relation ground dependence to avoid saying cause, but verbs are not magic. The job description is causal. A humbler fix is to stop pretending our causal vocabulary is only a phenomenal game. If we are licensed to talk about dependence at all, we are licensed to admit that our best causal stories aim, fallibly, at what is there, categories that learn. Treat the a priori not as timeless furniture, but as evolvable interfaces. The mind brings structure, yes, and the structure can be retrained by recalcitrant success. What feels necessary at one epoch becomes negotiable at another. That does not collapse into relativism. It becomes a research program. Show your work, test your necessary against tomorrow. Noumenon as placeholder, not prison. Keep the word to mark humility. Reality outruns any scheme, but retire it as a forbidden zone. Once noumenal stops naming a place and starts naming a limit of grasp, the attic isn't upstairs. It's the horizon that moves as you walk. The right response to moving horizons is not to sit. It is to keep walking. Regulative ideals with budgets. Use as if when you must, but tether it to procedures that spend and earn trust. Predictions, buildable machines, reversible arguments, repairable harms. If an as if cannot be cashed out in practices that reduce suffering or improve foresight, it belongs in a poem, not in a plan. There is another danger to name because it wears manners, moral insulation by epistemic modesty. We cannot know the real in itself becomes an alibi for avoiding hard claims about injustice that bite into metaphysics. This person is not a means, this river is not just material, this child's pain is not an appearance in your theory. Kant wanted the opposite, a dignity none could pawn. But the upstairs-downstairs rhetoric invites a polite skepticism that strong men adore. If the best people refuse to speak about the real, the worst people will. What does a repaired Kant look like? It keeps the critical posture. The mind contributes to its world. It ditches the panic. Contribution is not incarceration. It reads Transcendental as engineering constraints, not eternal edicts. Priors we start with because evolution and culture baked them in, which we revise when reality repeatedly humiliates them. It treats categories as policies the brain uses to get grip, causality, objecthood, agency. Policies that earn tenure by organizing surprises, not by being statute. It keeps a word like noumenon to remind us that every map is partial and that invention is part of perception. It refuses to turn that reminder into a customs office, and it translates moral grandeur into institutional courage. Autonomy is not a ghost upstairs. It is the social capacity to govern oneself without the domination, dependent on literacy, nutrition, time, safety, voice. Dignity is not an untouchable price tag. It is a design rule in law. No policy may treat persons as things, even for statistics. Duty is not a frost. It is a promise kept in weather. In this key, Kant's kingdom of ends stops being a glittering metaphor and starts being a budget, a school calendar, a workplace rulebook, a courtroom that says no to efficiency when it would shred a face. Self-test for the attic builder in all of us. When you say, we cannot know X, is that humility or cover? Does it protect the injured or the order that injures? When a new science scuffs your necessity, do you adjust the necessity or banish the science to mere phenomena? When you invoke as if, do you have a receipt, a practice, a result, or only a tone? Kant's genius was to stop metaphysics from playing emperor and to conscript it as architect. The flaw is the door he locked upstairs and the confidence with which he labeled the key impossible. The world has not respected that label. It keeps pushing through. Galaxies that curve space, quanta that refuse classical etiquette, brains that predict their world into clarity and back. The lesson to keep is the one that began the project. Reason must police itself. The correction is the one the project could not complete. Policing is not prohibition. It is procedure. You do not need a forbidden attic. You need a workshop with windows, rules for revision, and the nerve to call what you build a bridge, even when you cannot see to the other shore. Phenomenology Heidegger, bracketing the world, losing the handles. Phenomenology begins with a noble refusal. Stop theorizing about the world as if we were gods peering from nowhere. Return to the way the world shows itself to a life actually being lived. Husserl calls it the okay. Set aside the natural attitude, suspend metaphysical bets, describe experience precisely. The flow of time, the arc of attention, the way objects are always already about something. Heidegger descends a rougher road, not consciousness, but being in the world, not a spectator with inner pictures, but a creature thrown into tasks, tools, moods. He trades the laboratory for the workshop and the chapel, swaps logos for hammer, turns mind into Dasein, this mortal that must take a stand on its own existence. It feels like recovery. The world returns from abstraction. Chairs become chairs again, not coordinate systems. A door becomes something to enter, not a rectangle. Readiness to hand precedes presence at hand. We need dough, we don't contemplate molecules. When the hammer shatters, then theory arrives, too late and blinking. It's a healthy humiliation for intellectuals. The real world is the one that lets you forget your thinking until it breaks. But phenomenology's most elegant move is its oldest problem, bracketing. You set aside commitments about what exists in order to describe how it appears. The bracket is a safety rail against metaphysical fantasy. It is also a padlock. Having carefully declined to say what the world is, you slowly lose the right to explain why appearances go as they go, why surprises surprise, why illusions are illusions and not alternate reveals, why explanation can ever outrun description. The method protects experience from theory, and then struggles to reattach experience to anything that can check it. You can hear the creak where the hinges should be. A phenomenologist maps the lived shape of time, the now thickened by retention and protension, the way the past arrives as having been, the way the future presses. Beautiful. Then a neurologist toggles attention with a pulse. Shift now by milliseconds and a statistic appears. Where's the bridge? The Heideggerian reminds you that being is disclosed through care. Then an engineer asks how to build a cockpit that won't cook pilots when alarms stack in the wrong channel. If the method cannot be cached in cockpit design, it risks becoming high-resolution nostalgia. The second leak is intersubjectivity. Husserl tries to earn other minds by empathy and pairing. Heidegger declares being with as basic. We are already among others before we count them. Fair, but the theory's strength, refusing to reduce persons to data points, becomes a weakness when disagreement arrives. If truth is unconcealment in a clearing, who's clearing? If your disclosure contradicts mine, where do we go that isn't a tribunal of older disclosures? Science answers with replication, prediction, buildability, public handles. Phenomenology answers with better description. At its best, that deepens the question. At its worst, it becomes a velvet veto on methods that refuse to speak its dialect. Then there is mood. Heidegger is right that moods are not internal weather but ways the world shows up. Boredom stretches corridors. Anxiety empties meanings. Joy flings open distances. Mood is cognitive lighting. Yet when mood becomes ontology's engine, critique starts to look like aesthetic preference in armor. The noble seriousness, the turned-down irony, the farmers, the forest paths. There is a fragrance to the prose that can drift to romance about authentic life, measured always against a fallen modernity. You don't have to tattoo earth and blood on your sleeve to notice how easily this tone slides from unconcealment to myth. Heidegger's politics make the warning loud. You can separate ideas from their author. You must also listen for how a style of thought chooses its friends. A philosophy that worships rootedness and suspicion of calculative thinking can cultivate virtues we need. It can also feed a disdain for the very public instruments, law, measurement, audit, that keep power from wearing poetry while it arms. Phenomenology's epistemic humility, stop pretending to see from nowhere, tempts a second vice, quietism. If every stance is already situated, if we only ever speak from within a horizon, the courage to assert that something is simply wrong can wilt. The method trains finesse. Injustice sometimes needs a flat no. The street asks a reason to change zoning, redesign a ballot, rewire a hospital handoff. A paragraph on the ontological difference is not a wrench. There is also the hermeneutic circle. Understanding always already shaped by four structures, revised in the encounter, revised again. That is not a flaw, it is literacy. But a circle must be virtuous, tethered to checks that let bad readings die. In the arts, the audience is the check. In lived life, pain is. In policy, we need something duller. Outcomes the other side can verify and tools your enemies can use against you. Description without wager is calligraphy. And yet, throw phenomenology out and the clinic goes blind. The patient's "I feel like a glass box" matters. The amputee's phantom itch matters. The depressed person's "the future will not arrive" matters. Without careful first-person work, labs chase surrogate endpoints and lose the thing they were meant to save. The same in design. The tool that forces a user to think about the tool has failed. The chair you cannot forget is not a chair. So the flaw is not that phenomenology loves what it studies, it is that it can stall its study. It can behave as if description were redemption, and as if bracketing were a sacrament rather than a technique with a timer. A method that never risks being wrong becomes a mood board with footnote. There is a way forward that keeps the tenderness and regains the handles. Varela called it neurophenomenology. Train subjects in careful reporting, front-load experiments with lived distinctions, hunt for lawful covariations between experience and mechanism, iterate until both vocabularies sharpen. The point is not to reduce "I feel watched" to a blob on a scan. It is to discover bridges you can cross from both sides without insult. Enactivists push further. Organisms enact worlds by sensory motor skills. Meaning is not in the head or the world, but in the grip. That idea only earns its keep when it informs robots that don't fall down and therapies that unfreeze a life. Likewise, readiness to hand belongs in checklists. If a system is well designed, competence hides the system, attention is free for the task. That yields a metric: fewer attentional shifts, fewer mode errors, fewer handoffs that require verbal scaffolding. Heidegger, domesticated becomes human factors. The clearing turns into a dashboard you can read at 3 a.m. Phenomenology must also make peace with causation. Not the cartoon kind where laws stand outside life barking orders, but the practical kind. Change X and Y changes, reliably, measurably, affordably. A phenomenological therapy that cannot survive a randomized trial has described something precious. It has not yet earned a clinic's calendar. Trials that cannot hear what the patient says have earned a budget. They have not yet earned trust. The bridge is built from both banks with receipts. The self-corrections are simple to say and hard to do. Don't confuse a ban on metaphysical naivete with a ban on explanation. Don't mistake the richness of description for power over what hurts. Don't let the romance of authentic eclipse the justice of procedures. Don't weaponize mood. When you bracket, set a timer. When you unbracket, show your meds. And there is a kindness phenomenology can teach the rest of us without apology. Things should work so well that people can forget them. A city should be legible at night in the rain. A consent form should be readable by the person signing it. A ritual should carry meaning without manual. Being in the world is not a lyric, it is an instruction. Build worlds people can be in without humiliation, without expert translation, without the constant reminder of the machine. If you want a slogan, start in experience, end in handles. Let the first person lead the way to the third person tools that change the first person's life. Keep the richness, staple on the receipts. Otherwise, you have a gorgeous clearing where nothing gets built, a careful bracketing that never lifts, and a philosophy that can name our hunger for a world that fits, while leaving us standing in the kitchen, unfed. Existentialism, Sartre. Freedom with blindfolds. Sartre starts by burning the script. There is no given human nature, no blueprint, no author's note slipped under the skin. Existence precedes essence. You arrive, then you decide, through choices that sediment into who you are. There is no escape hatch. Even refusing to choose is a choice. You are condemned to be free, a sentence both terrifying and exalting. In this glare, excuses wither. No deity, no destiny, no temperament can stand between your act and your responsibility for it. A clean ethic for adults. The power of the view is its refusal to flatter. You don't find yourself, you make yourself, and you do it in public with consequences. Bad faith is the disease, the waiter who hides behind his role, the lover who pretends to be pure feeling, the coward who claims, "I couldn't help it." Sartre tears off costumes until a person is left staring at the mirror with only verbs to wear. The world presses back, yes, facticity, the facts that are not up to you. But even those facts are lived as invitations to projects you must own. The flaw isn't the demand for ownership, it's the overexposure. In Making Freedom the Sun, Sartre bleaches out too much weather. A philosophy written against comfortable excuses becomes a philosophy that turns constraint into a moral rumor. Bodies, traumas, addictions, debts, passports, diagnoses, police, borders. These are not merely situations waiting for heroic uptake. They are structures that can cancel options. Tell someone shackled to the floor that they are free to take their shackles as a project, and you have not empowered them. You have performed a liturgy of blame. Sartre has vocabulary for this, facticity versus transcendence, but the slider keeps sticking on transcendence. His most famous rhetorical move is to call every appeal to circumstance bad faith, which does tidy work in seminars and brutal work in shelters. When every complaint can be diagnosed as evasion, the theory becomes unfalsifiable. To the person who says, "I could not leave," the Sartrean can reply, "You chose not to." No experiment can dislodge a grammar that treats refusal as proof. Look at the look. Sartre's analysis of how another's gaze freezes us into objects. It is brilliant about shame and social performance, how we become a role in someone else's world and then forget we cooperated. But the dialectic hardens into a duel. Hell is other people because their look threatens my freedom. My look threatens theirs. We pump between domination and being dominated. It is too quick to treat relation as a contest of X-rays. Care vanishes, dependency becomes dishonor, tenderness is risk without a concept. De Beauvoir wrestled this toward ambiguity, recognizing that my freedom is braided with yours, not opposed to it. But Sartre's stage remains set for solitary heroics under surveillance. There is also political hollowness at the core. Choose is a motor, not a map. If authenticity is only sincerity before one's project, a sincere fascist passes. Sartre tried to repair this by wedding existentialism to Marxism, freedom in situation praxis aimed at liberation, but the graft never quite took. The early ethics center of gravity remains inside the individual resolve. Without a normative floor, no domination, equal standing, the dignity that sets limits on what may be chosen, existentialism can confuse courage for goodness and confuse transgression for depth. Psychology keeps testifying against the chalk outlines. Habit is not a minor fall from grace, it is what keeps a life upright. Unconscious processes are not just deniable choices, they are machinery that ignorance can't command. Trauma does not yield to declaration. It rewires expectation and startle responses, scripts attention to look for ambushes. Depression flattens the future until project is a word pronounced through felt concrete. A philosophy that treats these as colorful resistances to freedom will produce admirable speeches and terrible clinics. Temporality, too, gets bent into sermons. I am what I am not yet, Sartre says, emphasizing projection into possibilities. Beautiful and exhausting. If authenticity requires perpetual authorship, rest begins to look like cowardice, ritual like evasion, fidelity like fear. But long loves and steady crafts are not betrayals of freedom. They are how freedom becomes a style rather than a pose. The person who recommits to a promise is not denying their transcendence. They are letting it take root. Responsibility, inflated beyond human lung capacity, has side effects, shame inflation, and victim shaming. You are wholly responsible for what you make of what happens to you, can steal a spine. The same sentence handed to someone after catastrophe can break it. Moral luck exists. We did not pick our parents, our century, our health, our height, our passport. A doctrine that refuses to budget luck will smuggle punishment into pedagogy and call it maturity. So what is worth keeping without the burn? Keep the refusal of essence as destiny. Keep the insistence that roles are not prisons, that we are not scripts, that a life can be audited for evasion. Keep the bravery that says, if you can act, act. If you can repair, repair. If you can apologize, apologize. If you can change, stop narrating it and change. But bend freedom from metaphysical glare into capability. Real options under real conditions. Call it situated freedom. It is not the power to will anything. It is the power to make some futures available and to refuse degrading ones, given your body, your history, your tools, your neighbors, your laws. This pushes existentialism outward. If you love freedom, build infrastructure for it. Unions, clinics, transit, schools, ballots, childcare, clean air, due process. These are not excuses. They are the furniture of responsibility. The person who cannot leave a violent home because there is no shelter is not choosing. They are being cornered. Freedom that forgets logistics is poetry that blames. Bring others back as resources, not X-rays. The look can petrify. It can also rescue. A friend's gaze can hold you in the shape you forget you have. A therapist's presence can make options reappear. A community's expectation can carry you when your own will is on fumes. The existentialist correction isn't to idolize the crowd. It is to recognize that solitude is expensive and must be supplied sparingly. Tame bad faith from a cudgel into a tool. Use it to unmask the lies you tell to evade costs. Do not use it to erase cost. The test. If naming bad faith makes you more available to repair harm, keep it. If it only makes you superior, drop it. Authenticity, similarly, needs an object. It is not sincerity alone, but fidelity to goods that can judge you back. Truth, care, craft, justice. A liar can be sincere. Authenticity must answer to something outside the self. Borrow from psychology without surrendering to it. Freedom is real within a nervous system that predicts, habits that scaffold, moods that color. Train attention, design defaults that help your future self, cultivate rituals that keep promises easier to keep. Sartre was right that we must choose. He was wrong that choosing is enough. Person you become is a slow machine. Love it like a guard, not a stunt. Give the ethic guardrails. A minimal set will do. No project that requires another person's degradation is a worthy project. No identity that depends on someone else's silence is an identity to keep. No authenticity that cannot say, I was wrong, deserves the name. De Beauvoir's ethics of ambiguity is the better star. Your freedom finds meaning by helping create the conditions for others' freedom. That is not mood. It is budget and law. Finally, return anguish to its proper size. Anguish is not an existential fashion accessory. It is a signal that the future is open and someone will get hurt whatever you do. The right response is not performance. It is procedure. Learn, consult, forecast, decide, amend, apologize, repeat. A grown-up existentialism doesn't glorify the pain of choosing. It invests in ways to make good choices more likely and bad ones repairable. Self-tests for freedom with sight. Does your advice to choose include how and with what? Time, money, allies, or only that? When someone says, I couldn't, do you look first for the corner or for the cop-out? Do your authentic commitments survive contact with people who didn't choose you? When you say no excuses, is the person who benefits from that rule the same person who pays for it? Sartre's achievement is moral oxygen in rooms stale with alibis. His error is to turn oxygen into a spotlight that erases the furniture. Keep the air, turn down the glare, build the room so that people can breathe and move. Then say it plainly, you are responsible for the choices you can reasonably make. Therefore, we will fight to expand what you can reasonably make. Freedom without blindfolds begins there, not with a sermon, but with a key.
Absurdism, revolt without a compass. Absurdism begins where consolation ends. A mind hungry for order meets a world that will not answer, not malevolent, not kind, silent. We are built to ask why. The sky withholds verbs. Camus refuses the usual exits. No leap to a providence that will love us later. No suicide that cancels the question. No lie that perfumes the gap. Stay. Look, admit the mismatch between appetite and menu. Then live anyway. Revolt, freedom, passion. The stance is sculpted against despair like a face turned into wind. Its bravery is real. It punctures metaphysical vanity, exposes how often meaning is the aftertaste of habit and fear, and hands the day back to your hands. In the place where systems usually grow, Camus keeps only posture, lucid defiance, fidelity to the earth, solidarity with the humiliated. Sisyphus smiles, Dr. Rieu tends the sick without sermon. The ethic is modest and humane precisely because it gives up pretending. The flaw is also the ethic's pride, revolt without a compass. A stance is not yet a standard. If the world is indifferent and meaning is a human project without umpire, what distinguishes revolt that rescues from revolt that devours? Why should my obstinate yes to living constrain my appetites when they run through someone else's ribs? Camus wants limits. He writes of measure and the no that says yes, but his metaphysics hands him dust from order. He bans transcendent justification and then reaches for a humanism with teeth. The teeth materialize as rhetoric more than law. Start with the staging. The absurd is not a property of stones. It is a relation between a questioner and a mute world. That is clean. But when revolt becomes the answer, the drama shifts from epistemic to moral. Which revolts are worthy? The rebel in the rebel is noble so long as he refuses murder, makes solidarity with the crushed, says no to humiliation. Beautiful. But why? If we are strict, because otherwise we betray our own revolt, turns ethics into style, coherence with one's posture. A consistent sadist might pass. Camus senses this and tries to anchor limits in shared vulnerability. I rebel, therefore we are. The cry against being treated as a thing recognizes that others have the same cry. A thin universal is born, do not humiliate. Yet from where does this therefore draw force? From sympathy, from recognition of likeness, from fear that rolls reverse? All of these can fail in the wild. A metaphysic that denies objective value must smuggle value into the cargo hold. Dignity, measure, solidarity, restraint. Camus smuggles with grace. The customs officer in your head still sees the suitcase. The second wobble is misread luck. Absurd freedom speaks as if the choice to affirm life were available to all at the low price of lucidity and style. But despair is not always a mood you can out-argue. It is sometimes a disease. Trauma scripts attention to ambush. Major depression flattens the future until revolt is a noise from another planet. To say we must imagine Sisyphus happy is a tonic in philosophy. In clinic, it can be a cruelty. An ethic that refuses metaphysical anesthesia must budget for pharmacological and institutional anesthesia for the simple logistics of keeping people from drowning between sentences. Third, politics by allergy. Camus's recoil from totalizing systems is justified by corpses. The 20th century wrote his footnotes, but the recoil hardens into a suspicion of any thick coordination. If leaps produce gulags, stay on the ground. Yes. Yet public goods require scaffolds, laws, budgets, slow bureaucracies, boring oversight. The absurdist temperament loves courage in winter and distrusts calendars. That can yield a politics of noble gestures, allergic to plan, that leaves the meticulous work of justice to the very engineers whose metaphysical confidence he distrusts. Outrage without institutions is weather. A fourth leak is teleology in drag. Absurdism insists the universe has no script. The rebel nevertheless sketches a drama. Metaphysical revolt, historical revolt. Measure, terror, moderation. Almost a salvation history of imminence. The saints are soldiers of limit. The devils are ideologues of the absolute. But if all grand arcs are suspect, why is this arc exempt? The answer, again, depends on the audience already sharing the taste for measure. Preaching to the choir is not a sin. Mistaking choir for chorus is. There is a deeper contradiction that gives the ethic its beauty and weakness at once. Camus wants love without lies. He wants a world with no sacraments, and still a sacrament of decency, a universe without meaning, and still meaningful refusal of cruelty. He knows the trick, be faithful to the earth, and knows the price. The earth includes the indifferent machinery that makes plague and earthquake, and also the apes that delight in power. If nothing is sacred beyond our saying so, then sacredness must be enforced by us. But enforced how and by whom? If by outrage alone, it will be episodic. If by law, we are back in the workshop of designs, compromises, trade-offs, the places where philosophies go to be measured. What would a repaired absurdism look like without surrendering its core refusal? First, distinguish ontological silence from moral quiet. The world owes no answers. We owe each other reasons. That is not a leap to heaven. It is a decision about neighbors. Make the step explicit. Because I hate humiliation in my flesh, I will act to make a world with less of it, and I accept constraints, including constraints on my freedom, to do so. Revolt becomes institutionalizable, card-carrying at City Hall, not only lyrical on a page. Second, swap style for standards. Keep the posture, lucidity, refusal of lies, refusal of murder, and write it as rules that can embarrass us when our mood fails. No torture, no collective punishment, no secret prisons, no starvation as policy, no exile by poverty. Metrics, audits, judges, inspectors general, the dull angels who keep revolt from degenerating into vibe. Third, translate measure into design. A society that honors limits does not only say no to extremes, it builds guardrails. Sunset clauses on emergency powers, antitrust to keep private sovereignties from growing, budgeting that funds the unspectacular, clinics, pipes, schools, disaster agencies that make plague less a moral parable and more a solved logistics. Moderation becomes architecture, not aesthetic. Fourth, fun contingency. Absurdism's appeal is its romance with risk. Its failure is to forget that most people drown in it. Build redundancy. Income floors, shelters, hotlines, paid leave, harm reduction. Revolt against despair includes paying the rent for strangers. Fifth, widen solidarity beyond likeness. I rebel, therefore we are. Risks closing the circle to those who look like we. Tie the we to vulnerability, not similarity. Persons, animals capable of suffering, ecosystems upon which persons depend. Your revolt against humiliation should not require another's face to resemble yours to count. Sixth, admit grief without glamour. Sisyphus can smile, he can also cry. Permission to despair at noon is part of honesty. Permission to try again at 3 is part of love. A culture that can speak both sentences without accusation keeps people alive longer than a culture that insists on gallantry. Seventh, retire the myth of purity in revolt. You will compromise. You will vote for a lesser evil to prevent a greater one. You will tolerate an imperfect law because the perfect one cannot pass before winter. Camus hated necessity as argument. Necessity, named plainly and revisited often, is also how you keep bodies warm. What survives of the ethic is the part that made you love it. No lies. Don't use God or history to excuse your taste for domination. Don't wrap revenge in a flag. Don't pretend your tribe's pain crowns your tribe with rights to make others swallow glass. Name the humiliation you can see, stop it where you stand, and join with others to stop the rest. If you must choose between an honest ugliness and a beautiful lie, choose the ugliness and cook it into something edible. Self-tests for revolt with a compass. When you say no, can you specify what institution would make that no stick after you leave the room? When you praise measure, can you point to a rule that bites you and not only your enemy? When you invoke solidarity, does it include the unphotogenic and the unlikable? When you speak of freedom, do you fund options for those who currently have none? Absurdism's gift is to keep us on the ground when the ground is cold. It's dangerous to mistake posture for policy and courage for ethics. Keep the ground, keep courage. Then take one step Camus only half allowed. Let revolt hire engineers. Build limits into law, build mercy into budgets, build truth into procedures that survive your most charismatic day. The world will not answer. We can. Nihilism, sawing off the branch you sit on. Nihilism is the temptation that arrives when every story looks like sales. You inspect gods and find politics, inspect justice and find power. You inspect love and find chemicals on a timer. Take the hint too seriously and a simple sentence follows. Nothing has inherent meaning or value. Some make it a mood, nothing feels worth it. Some an argument, no objective reasons exist. Some a politics, all ideals are masks. Some a swagger, I'm smarter than the dupes. The common core is subtraction. Peel away illusions until nothing obligates, nothing shines, nothing deserves. Its power is an acid we need. It dissolves counterfeit halos. It humiliates the cult of progress, the sincerity of tyrants, the sentimentality that launders harm. It can save a life. When a cruel voice says you must, the nihilist answer, says who, has rescued more than one stranger at 3 a.m. Honesty is a mercy when consolation is a leash. The flaw is that the acid keeps eating. Taken as a final position, nihilism is performatively self-sabotaging. If nothing matters, the claim that nothing matters does not matter. If there are no reasons, there is no reason to believe there are no reasons. The move that felt like supreme lucidity turns out to be a sentence with no subject. Air congratulating itself for being thin. Even the nihilists' corrections smuggle standards. Clarity over confusion, courage over cant, accuracy over pretense. Refusing value while practicing it is less revolution than costume. Practical life exposes the contradiction by lunchtime. To act is to prefer, to speak is to commit, to plan is to value the future. A human day is a ladder of small oughts. Brush your teeth, answer the child, show up, don't lie, fix the leak. And coordination requires more than weathered shrugging. A doctrine that treats these as elaborate misunderstandings of physics will either be abandoned by dinner or become cruelty with a smirk. Cruelty loves nihilism's afterglow. Total cynicism is a gift to power. If every value claim is manipulation, the most shameless manipulators win by default. The tyrant does not need your faith, he needs your incredulity toward anyone who offers an alternative. A population that believes in nothing believes rumors next. A citizen who sneers at norms will soon be taking orders from uniforms. Nihilism imagines itself the enemy of domination. In the wild, it becomes its usher. Another confusion is diagnostic. Despair feels like truth because it is vivid. We confuse a mood for a metaphysics. A major depression drains color from the future. A trauma trains attention to expect ambush. Boredom stretches minutes until purpose looks like propaganda. These are real conditions, not arguments. Narcan is not a philosophy journal. SSRIs are not syllogisms. Treat the wound, then talk about the world. Nihilism also mistakes a victory for a definition. To show that a value lacks eternal foundations is not to show that it lacks force. A promise binds without a sky. A game compels without metaphysical chess pieces. Love obligates before any tribunal writes it down. Norms can be constructed and still bite. Meanings can be authored and still answer back. The fact that a bridge is engineered does not make it optional to gravity. This is the fork where many choose a better road. From nihilism to deflationary realism about truths and constructive pluralism about values. Truth is not a throne, it is a practice that earns its keep by prediction, repair, and shared orientation. Value is not a law in the sky. It is a network of commitments that reduce suffering, enable cooperation, and make certain goods stable enough to survive moods. Neither is a fantasy. Both are inventions with consequences. What does a life look like when you keep nihilism's honesty and refuse its void? 1. Replace essence with policy. Don't argue that justice is real in the abstract. Build rules that work. No torture, due process, open audits, rights that majorities can't cancel on bad days. Call them policies, not halos, and defend them because they prevent predictable harms. If a rule stops innocence from being crushed, that is a reason. You do not need eternity to make the case. 2. Treat meanings as maintained machines. Purpose isn't found, it's serviced by schedules, peers, skills, rituals, feedback, and rest. If nothing feels meaningful, try maintenance before metaphysics. Fix sleep, fix debt, fix friendship, fix craft. The sense of meaning often follows the friction you remove. 3. Cash truth out as repair. Adopt the test. Does this belief help us forecast, coordinate, and reduce injury? Conspiracy feels meaningful. Vaccination programs keep babies alive. Between them stands a scoreboard. Put your nihilism to work by auditing claims, not nullifying the concept of accuracy. 4. Name value without romance. Dignity, the rule against using people as things because it breeds predictable horror. Solidarity, the recognition that your skin can be mine next winter, plus the math of public goods. Beauty, attention trained away from predation long enough to love a world that doesn't bill you for the glance. No trumpets, adequate reasons. 5. Learn the geometry of commitment. A promise is a time machine. It moves a decision from a moment of weakness to a moment of strength. Marriage, union membership, creative partnerships, civic oaths, these are ways to get leverage on your future self. The nihilist calls it self-deception. The adult calls it design. 6. Keep the knife for idols, not for bonds. Your skepticism is precious. Spend it on leaders who confuse their will with truth, on systems that punish the poor for being poor, on priests of any kind who are allergic to audits. Don't spend it on the neighbor who needs help moving a couch. 7. Resist aestheticized despair. Cool is cheap. Care is costly. Irony can protect you from embarrassment. It will not protect the child whose inhaler is empty. If your style requires other people's injuries to feel authentic, your style is a mask you made out of someone else's lungs. 8. Budget for luck. A value practice that refuses to budget luck becomes a blaming machine. Design policies assuming that talent is unevenly distributed, catastrophe is cluster-prone, and mercy is cheaper than cleanup. 9. Write standards that bite you. If nothing matters, check whose immunity that sentence purchases. A good test for sincerity is whether your rules can hurt your side. If they can't, you've written a grievance, not an ethic. This posture still allows for the cleanest delights of nihilism, laughing at pomp, distrusting grand designs, refusing to baptize suffering as destiny. It adds handles, laws, receipts, habits, institutions. It permits a sentence the nihilist cannot say aloud without blushing, I care. Care is not a metaphysical claim. It is a choice that multiplies reasons around it. What, then, becomes of art, love, and death under this repaired sky? Art does not need a cosmic verdict. It needs attention and craft. You make something because paying attention made you larger, and you share it because someone else's attention made them warmer. That is a complete circuit. You can run it without pretending the universe keeps a tally. Love does not require fate. It requires maintenance, a humility to accept that your most intense meanings are built in hours and dishes and forgiveness, not bestowed by oracle. The absence of cosmic guarantee is not a deficit. It's the condition that makes tenderness worth anything. Death remains terrible. You do not fix that with a theory. You build an economy of grief that lets people fall apart, gives them time, and does not sell them certainty. You write wills, you leave passwords, you say the words while you can, meaning after that is a worksite, not a gospel. Self-test for the recovering nihilist. When you say nothing matters, does someone nearby get hurt less or more? Are you using skepticism to avoid grief or work? Do you correct others for being wrong? Then you believe in better and worse. Start paying your beliefs in public. Can your convictions survive contact with someone who dislikes you? If not, you've engineered a mirror, not a reason. If you admire cruelty's candor more than kindness's clumsiness, what exactly are you practicing to become? Nihilism is a useful solvent. It is a terrible diet. Keep a vial in your pocket for the day someone hands you a crown in the shape of a creed. Use it when an institution pleads holiness to dodge an audit, when a politician confuses fervor with fact, when a tradition disguises harm as heritage. But put the vial away when a neighbor asks for a ride, when a nurse needs a union, when a child needs a story, when a river needs a law. Sawing off the branch feels like clarity until you notice who is sleeping below. Better to carve the rot out and build a brace. The tree still stands, the shade is real, the reasons are enough. Scientific realism. Fossils of certainty. Scientific realism is the grown-up answer to the carnival of truth. Our best confirmed theories are not just handy stories. They are approximately true descriptions of a mind-independent world. Electrons aren't metaphors. Tectonic plates aren't polite fictions. Viruses aren't social constructs with good PR. The no miracles refrain gives it a drumbeat. If theories were merely lucky instruments, the stable success of prediction, engineering, and intervention would be a miracle per minute. Bridges stand, vaccines work, the comet arrives on schedule. Believe your instruments, believe ontology, cautiously, but for real. The flaw is not that realism trusts too much, it's where it puts the trust. Realism keeps confusing yesterday's fossils of certainty with bedrock. History is a museum of once indispensable entities now wearing explanatory toe tags: caloric, phlogiston, ether, absolute simultaneity, vital forces, epicycles layered like pastry. They didn't fail because the scientists were fools. They failed because success is promiscuous. Multiple structures can fit the same data, laboratories can stabilize illusions, and instruments can train the world to answer the questions we know how to grade. The pessimistic meta-induction is old but stubborn. If generations of approximately true theories died of truth, why should today's be immune? Start with the many-to-one fit. Data are thin, models are fat. Underdetermination means that rival theories can generate near-identical predictions over large domains. You can prefer elegance, simplicity, or consilience, but these are virtues of craft, not windows into ontology. The map that compresses the most into the fewest assumptions often wins. It does not follow that the coastline is a spline. Add theory-ladenness. You never meet data naked. You meet measurements produced by instruments designed under models protected by institutions funded by interests. That is not a conspiracy. It is civilization. but it means that what shows up as signal is already in a negotiated frame. How you binned, filtered, operationalized, and decided what counts. A particle trace is not a trace of the world in itself. It is a trace in a machine trained to display a world your colleagues can parse. The realism that takes such prints as direct fingerprints is confusing stabilization with revelation. Then the replication knots and model fragilities of our century. Effects shriveling under stricter protocols, parameters that must be tuned just so. Complex systems where success is local, brittle, and surrounded by chaos. The more we move from planets to people, from vacuums to villages, the more laws become tendencies with temper. A realism that insists on capital L laws everywhere turns empirical humility into heresy. The world's order is patchy, our hubris is smooth. Realism tries to repair these wounds with structural realism. Don't marry entities, marry equations. Structures survive theory change. Maxwell to QED, Newtonian to relativistic mechanics. Perhaps what we really learn is the relations. But relations relate something, and the shrug about underlying natures quickly becomes a fog where ethics and explanation go to mumble. Only structure is real ends up sounding like only the skeleton matters. Good luck feeding a body on ribs. Another patch is entity realism. Believe in what you can manipulate. We aren't sure what electrons are, but we can fire them and watch devices behave. Intervention licenses belief. Better. Yet manipulative success can be achieved with effective surrogates that carve the world in ways convenient to our grip rather than faithful to its joints. We can manipulate constellations of parameters that travel together without ever isolating the thing our ontology imagines. Ask pharmacology how often a pathway was the target until another decade of data broke the spell. Realism's biggest rhetorical hammer, the no miracles argument, also hides a temptation to convert success needs a reason into success selects the right ontology. Success needs many reasons: craft, iteration, conciliant evidence, and sometimes good luck in a world that does not punish approximations evenly. You can fly a plane on Newton while the cosmos bends light. You can insulate a house with dogma so long as the winter is mild. Why does any of this matter outside philosophy rooms? Because reification, taking models as reality, licenses harms. When a risk score is treated as a property of a person, when a genome-wide association is sold as a fate, when an epidemiological model is mistaken for the disease, when an algorithm's confidence is confused with truth, policies harden around proxies and people are cut to fit. Scientific realism's tone of certainty can become a state of exception for doubt, and doubt is a safety device. We need science to build hospitals. We do not need science to pretend it has already built the last one. Still, anti-realism has its own toxins: cynicism that eats expertise, conspiracism that eats cooperation, a relativism so polite it lets power write every footnote. Throw out realism and you hollow medicine, engineering, and any hope of a common world sturdy enough to argue inside. So the task is repair, not revolution. Keep the courage that says something is out there and we've learned how to touch it. Lose the swagger that says what we touch is what it is. What does repaired realism look like? 1. Credence, not coronation. Treat ontological commitment as graded belief with error bars. Electrons, high credence. Dark matter particles of type X, medium. Cognitive modules for every behavior, low. Make these public and revisable. You don't need a throne, you need a ledger. 2. Robustness over single score success. Believe more when different methods, instruments, and models converge while failing differently when they fail. If satellite data, ground sensors, lab assays, and field experiments point the same way, and their errors don't rhyme, you have reason. If all your evidence flows through one pipeline, you have a bright idea with a choke point. 3. Intervention with interpretation. Manipulative success is a ticket to serious consideration, not to metaphysical citizenship. Build a dossier. What exactly did you intervene on? How local are the conditions? What counterfactuals would break the effect? Treat every works as the beginning of ontology, not its coronation. 4. Model pluralism with arbitration. Keep multiple rival models in play and vote them with predictive performance, mechanistic depth, and social cost of error. Don't collapse diversity early because one curve fit wins last quarter. Long-run truth often comes from hybrids that steal the right parts. 5. Structural plus causal plus material. Resist monogamy. Structures are real, so are mechanisms, so are material constraints. Commit to an and. A theory earns realism as it demonstrates stable structure, manipulable mechanisms, and material realization that constrains counterfactuals. 6. Value transparency. Every model has normative knobs, loss functions, fairness definitions, discount rates. Publish them alongside your parameters. Realism without declared values becomes stealth politics in a lab coat. 7. Error budgets and humility clauses. Attach an error budget to claims where the bodies are buried, where the data are weak, how results might flip. Add a humility clause. The phenomenon is real under these regimes. Portability unknown. This stops good theories from turning into municipal bylaws. 8. Reality by receipts. Buildable and breakable. Give reality handles. An entity you can isolate, detect by independent means, and leverage to make new predictions that hurt when they fail, earns more ontology than a parameter that explains yesterday retroactively. 9. Social auditability. Open data where possible, adversarial replication where valuable, audit trails for code and preprocessing, and incentives for negative results. Realism should not require secrecy. If a truth cannot survive many hands, it has more marketing than mass. 10. Risk-aware ontologies. When reification will have large human costs, criminal justice, medicine, welfare, prefer conservative ontologies that leave people wiggle room. Treat proxies as provisional with appeals and fallbacks. A realism fit for citizens has due process baked into its metaphysics. This is not a retreat into mush. It's a posture that says, the world pushes back, and we've learned to lean in the right places. Our leaning leaves dents. Our dents are sometimes in the apparatus rather than in the world. We will find out which by inviting failure. The truth isn't a monument you guard. It's a construction site with OSHA rules. 2 common detours deserve warning labels. The triumphalist syllogism, jets fly, therefore quarks as currently conceived are real. Jets fly because large chunks of the aerodynamic story are right enough at that scale. You can keep the jet and revise the quark. Ontology should respect scale discipline. The despairing sneer, because some past entities died, nothing is real. The right lesson is fallibilism, not nihilism. Thermodynamics didn't vanish when caloric did, it got better. A corrected realism keeps what works, specifies the scope, and stops pretending scope is eternity. What about ethics? Realism tempts scientists to think values are what you do after the graph, but measurement is a moral act. What you measure becomes what exists for policy. A realism fit for democracy must carry the burden of inclusion. Measure harms to those who are inconvenient to sample, price errors that fall on the voiceless, refuse ontologies that erase persons because their pain is hard to instrument. If the real is what the meter can see, buy better meters and ask who is writing the purchase order. Self-tests for a chastened realist. Does your confidence track independent lines of evidence or mainly the status of your subfield? Can an informed critic reproduce your pipeline and land near your claim? If not, you have a story, not a result. Do you publish your value knobs? If not, you're doing stealth metaphysics. When your model fails out of sample, do you lower ontological credence or rename the problem? Can you state what would make you disbelieve in your favorite entity? A belief without an exit is a badge, not a belief. Scientific realism, repaired, is less a creed than a discipline of hope. It says, the world isn't a dream, and piece by careful piece we can learn how it works. Today's pieces are defeasible. Tomorrow's will include some of today's, made sharper by our humility. We trade the fossils of certainty for living bones that grow under pressure. We keep the bridges that carry trucks and admit the river can move. We honor the fact that truth has weight by letting it be carried by procedures that anyone strong enough can lift. Believe in electrons the way a builder believes in steel, with mill certificates, stress tests, and a warranty, not with hymns. Instrumentalism, planes with no landing gear. Instrumentalism is philosophy's safety manual for a world full of contraptions. Don't argue about what things are, ask whether the equations fly. Theories are tools, models are instruments. Truth is a dangerous word. If a device predicts, controls, and coordinates our actions with success, that's all the metaphysics we need. Don't kiss electrons goodnight, measure currents. Don't baptize quarks, fit data. The stance is a rebuke to ontological vanity and a love letter to getting things done. There is wisdom here. Instrumentalism keeps us from marrying yesterday's entities. It reminds us that usefulness is not an accident, that prediction is a public test anyone can grade, that laboratories are judged by receipts. It is also a relief in an age of aggressive models. Believe as much as you must to act, and no more. Engineers, doctors, pilots, epidemiologists, many live like instrumentalists even if they talk like realists at home. The flaw is the landing. A plane that only proves it can lift off will someday run out of runway. Instrumentalism treats understanding as optional and ontology as delusion. It forgets that the long-run reliability of instruments often depends on commitments it refuses to make. When you say it works, that's enough. You borrow confidence from a background you decline to name, assumptions about mechanism, domain, error behavior, portability. The plane is aloft on unacknowledged faith. Start where the stance is strongest. Prediction. Two models fit the curve. One has moving parts. The other is a black box interpolator. Instrumentalism says whichever predicts next quarter better wins. For trading or weather tomorrow, fair. For designing a drug, building a bridge, or setting a policy that will be stuck in institutions for years, the better question is why the prediction works and when it will fail. Tools that cannot say when they break have a habit of breaking when the costs are highest. Consider novel success. You can tune a model to a region and watch it shine. Then it is asked to predict in a wildly different regime and still does, stunningly so. Realists say that's evidence the model caught something true about the structure. Instrumentalism looks at the scoreboard and shrugs, still just works. But shrugging here is blind thrift. The very reason we trust a device as we carry it into new domains is because we suspect it tracks how the world is, not merely how the data looked. Without that suspicion, every leap is a gamble disguised as stoicism. Then explanation. People do not only want to know what happens, they want to understand why. Explanation does work. It guides intervention, compresses memory, detects fraud, coordinates teams, diffuses panic. An algorithm that says output 0.73 predicts. An explanation that says because A causes B through C under conditions D generates counterfactual control. Change D, avoid the crash. Instrumentalism can mimic explanation with clever summaries. It cannot grant explanation any special status without smuggling in the very ontic talk it forbids. There is also the ethics of opacity. When a sentencing tool rates a person high risk, an insurer declares a claim fraud likely, or a welfare model flags a household for investigation, those outputs spill into lives. If a model is only an instrument, not a claim about underlying realities, protest becomes etiquette. The tool misfires sometimes, but harms require reasons. A citizen's right to contest an adverse decision presupposes that the decision purported to say something about them that can be false, not just something statistically handy. Instrumentalism's shrug drains accountability from domains that need it most. Add scientific practice itself. Instrumentalism pictures raw data tamed by neutral techniques, but techniques are value-laden. Loss functions, smoothing priors, stopping rules, discount rates. Choosing them is not mere craft. It declares what kinds of error we tolerate, whose pain we undercount, which futures we prefer. We only care if it works is often code for we quietly chose our values upstream. A stance meant to avoid metaphysics becomes stealth politics. Underdetermination, often invoked in instrumentalism's favor, cuts both ways. If many models fit, why privilege the most predictive one today over the more interpretable or mechanistic one that may be more stable tomorrow? Because works now is an answer when costs are small and reversibility cheap. Beyond that, prudence wants thicker warrants than a leaderboard. Instrumentalism's highbrow cousin, constructive empiricism, tries a careful compromise. Believe only that theories are empirically adequate, true about observables, agnostic about unobservables. It is tidy. But across disciplines, the boundary between observable and unobservable is a budget line. Microscopes rented, satellites launched, sensors invented. The stance risks consecrating current instrumentality as metaphysics. What we can't see today becomes what we shouldn't believe in until a grant makes it visible tomorrow. The social aftermath is familiar. Model monocultures that win benchmarks, colonize policy, then fail catastrophically out of distribution. Proxy worship that treats measures as the thing measured, harming people designed out of the training set. Innovation theater that optimizes dashboards while reality slumps. Instrumentalism did not engineer these harms, it made them harder to name. Repair requires taking the best of instrumentalism, its discipline, and giving it landing gear. 1. Prediction with passports. Every model should ship with a domain of validity card. Here's the regime it was trained on. Here's where calibration holds. Here's the shift that will break it. That card is an ontological whisper. It names structural assumptions. Instrumentalism can keep its modesty while admitting that models carry maps of their imagined world. 2. Explanation as a performance requirement. Where stakes are high and coercive power is involved, medicine, criminal justice, welfare, demand explainable claims, statements that a human can contest with evidence and that can be judged wrong. Not every explanation reaches essences. Many are mechanistic sketches or counterfactual handles. Require them anyway. A tool that cannot be wrong about you should not be allowed to rule you. 3. Pluralism with arbitration. Keep rival models in active use and vote them along multiple axes: predictive loss, mechanistic plausibility, transport robustness, social cost of errors. Instrumentalism loves the first axis. A democracy needs the rest. Arbitration panels should include domain experts and affected communities, not only modelers. 4. Intervention logs. Works should mean works under intervention, not merely retrospective fit. Build infrastructure for deliberate ABs, staggered adoption, stepped wedge designs. A stance that worships instruments must love experiments that try to break them. 5. Value disclosure. Publish the normative knobs, loss functions, fairness criteria, discount rates, priors, alongside the code if a model is an instrument, say for which ends and whose risk. Hidden values are where instrumentalism quietly becomes ideology. 6. Understanding budgets. Fund interpretability research as public infrastructure. Explanations are not free, neither is trust. Treat dollars spent on making models legible as safety spend, like bridges rated for earthquakes. 7. Exit hatches. Give subjects appeal rights and human-in-the-loop vetoes wherever models gate life chances. An instrument that cannot be overruled is no longer an instrument. It is a policy in disguise. Nub 8. Ontology by receipts. Promote entities to real enough status when they meet a triad: manipulable, multiply detectable, predictively fecund across regimes. Electrons cleared that bar, many psychological modules have not. This is not metaphysical swagger, it is audited commitment, exactly what a chastened realist and a grown-up instrumentalist can share. 9. Failure festivals. Institutionalize red teams and bake-offs, where models are stress-tested on pathological cases, attacked with adversarial examples, pushed beyond their training envelope. Celebrate the tools that die well with clear tombstones, so successors inherit cautions instead of hype. 10. Thick user manuals. Replace it works with a thick manual. Assumptions, cautions, calibration curves, counterexamples, ethical constraints, and do not use conditions. Instruments without manuals are merely confidence machines. There's a temperament to cultivate alongside these repairs. Engineers' pride, a refusal to accept black box as an honorific, a culture that values mean time to explanation almost as much as mean time between failures. Scientists' shame, the willingness to retract and revise in public, ontological humility expressed as version control for belief. Citizens' insistence, no model without due process for those it judges, no metric without the neglected measured, no works without receipts anyone can read. Instrumentalism's enemies are not only realists with hymns, they are also romantics of understanding who love a beautiful mechanism more than a working fix. The repair job is to insist on both, prediction now and progress in grasp. You can be strict about usefulness without becoming flippant about truth. Self-tests for the instrument-minded. When your model fails out of distribution, do you lower your confidence or redraw the distribution? Can a layperson discover from your documentation where not to use your tool? Do you know which values your loss function encodes, and could an opponent audit them? If a decision hurts someone, can they point to a claim your model asserted and show it false? Does your comparative advantage come from better data and craft, or from opaque proxies that would be illegal if spelled out? What remains after landing gear is a stance worth keeping. Instruments are how we make the world answer. Prediction is a civic virtue. Humility beats hubris. But a society cannot live on takeoff rolls. It needs planes that can land, pilots who can say what the dials mean, mechanics who write what they changed, and passengers with rights when smoke appears. An instrumentalism like that is not a dodge. It is a discipline, one that measures what matters and tells the truth about what it cannot yet measure. So the next flight is not a prayer, but a plan. Classical theism, hiddenness, and the bill for evil. Classical theism promises a clean architecture, an absolutely perfect source, omnipotent, omniscient, wholly good, creates and sustains all that is. Being itself is gift, order is him, goodness is not an accident, but a fountain. If anything is lovely or true or noble, it is a ray from that sun. The moral comfort is immense. Your life is not a statistical fluke. Suffering has a context. Duty has a ground deeper than fashion. Love is not a trick of hormones, but consonance with the grain of reality. The flaw arrives with a tally sheet. If a perfect being freely chose this world and keeps it in being at every moment, then every horror comes with a return address. Not because God performs the evil, but because the whole possibility space was known, chosen, and continuously willed as the stage on which it happens. The bill for evil is astronomical. Burned children, bone cancers, genocides, quiet despairs that never make a sentence. Permitted is not a solvent. Permission with foreknowledge and alternative options is a kind of design. The standard replies are venerable. Free will, creatures worth loving must be able to refuse love. Moral drama requires risk. Soul-making, courage, patience, mercy, virtues impossible in a painless terrarium, require friction. Greater good and soul-saving stories, the ledger works in a currency we cannot count now. Natural law, stable physics that lets science and responsibility grow, will also allow plate tectonics and viruses. Hiddenness, love that bullies with proof is not love. God veils himself to protect freedom. Each reply has wisdom, each leaks. Free will does not cover tsunamis, pediatric leukemia, or predation written into the biosphere long before human choice. And even on the moral side, the defense under-explains degree and distribution. Why such extravagant permissions? Why so clustered on the already crushed? Soul-making risks, instrumentalizing victims. Your agony is someone else's virtue, Jim. Greater good stories slide into celestial utilitarianism, where any atrocity can be stamped necessary if it feeds a hidden calculus. Natural law defenses show why a world with physics has risk. They do not show why a world with these parameters had to have infants choking in smoke while their parents pound locked doors. Hiddenness meant to protect freedom ignores that coercion is not the only mode of manifestation. One could imagine a God whose presence is as steady as conscience or as unmistakable as music, inviting without trampling. Behind all of it lurk two pressures that squeeze the doctrine from opposite sides. One, the perfection paradox. If God is perfect simplicity, no parts, no temporal change, no unfulfilled potentials, divine action becomes hard to picture without metaphors that evaporate on contact. Answers that say God suffers with us warm the soul and collide with a tradition that denies passion in God. Answers that say God decided smack time and revision. You end up with a grammar of analogies that can bless any outcome because the referent is protected against specifics. Number 2, the moral asymmetry. We judge human rulers by what they foresee and could prevent. A leader who allows preventable terror for long-run pedagogy would not survive a vote. Theism asks us to suspend that asymmetry. The standards we use for creatures do not apply to Creator. Skeptical theism codifies this suspension. God's reasons are beyond us. Our moral intuitions are not calibrated for cosmic policy. Fair enough regarding details. But when the gap swallows all critique, the view becomes unfalsifiable. Any suffering is compatible with goodness, by definition. A goodness that cannot be dented by evidence begins to look like relabeling rather than knowledge. Hiddenness deserves its own ledger. The world is full of honest doubters, not scoffers in a play, but persons who begged for a whisper and heard air, who would have arranged their lives around a living presence if one had shown up in a language they could not miss. The standard counsel: seek sincerely, look in the right places, doubt your doubts, can protect comfort at the expense of empathy. A love that wants to be known can choose modes of presence, steady, plural, unmistakable, without coercion. If such modes exist only as philosophers' maybes, hiddenness remains a wound that apologetics salves with tone. Then there is the Euthyphro pressure. Is the good good because God wills it, or does God will it because it is good? Pick the first horn and morality is ultimately volition. If God decreed cruelty tomorrow, cruelty would be holy. Pick the second and goodness floats outside God, making the divine will a recognizer rather than a source. Sophisticated theists say goodness is identical with God's nature, not arbitrary, not external, But the identity can go glassy, appeals to nature halt debate at the waterline. When specifics cut, bodily autonomy, torture, honesty under tyranny, the move back to essence often turns into a fog machine. And yet, people love God with their lives. They feed strangers and bury enemies and sit through the night next to ventilators because a story about love made them ferocious against despair. To call all of that hallucination is lazy. Theism has produced saints and safeguards, hospitals, hospices, abolitionists, caregivers who received no applause but believed someone saw. Its deepest insight that reality is hospitable to love, that gratitude is a form of knowledge, should not be lost to easy sneers. So what is salvageable once we stare at hiddenness and the bill for evil without blinking? 1. Kenotic correction. Trade maximal control for self-emptying love. A God who refuses unilateral override as a policy, who works by invitation and entanglement, will leave more room for creaturely causation and thus more pain. But this is at least morally legible. Restraint is the cost of non-coercive communion. Kenosis, self-emptying, is more coherent than a power that could always rescue and selects not to for invisible reasons. 2. Open futures. Relax exhaustive, settled foreknowledge of creaturely free acts. Open theism, or relax omnipotence in the classical sense. Process theism. Both moves scandalize orthodoxy. Both make the world's horror not a chosen instrument, but a risk even God cannot unilaterally cancel without breaking the terms of love or the metaphysical fabric. You lose icy perfection. You gain a God who can be surprised, who can grieve without allegory, who can partner without puppetry. 3. Natural law with mercy built in. Keep stable physics, add provision. Redundancy in ecosystems, a creation bias toward recoverability, margins in human biology that blunt random ruin. Theists often argue that we already see such bias. Critics reply that the bias is thin. A credible theism should be willing to predict a tilt toward repair, organisms with fallback pathways, societies that can discover justice because it fits the furniture of the world. 4. Presence by practices. If hiddenness protects freedom, counterbalance by cultivated conspicuity, forms of presence that scale with attention, shared rituals, silence that trains perception, moral labor that repeatedly coincides with a sense of accompaniment. Not proof, reliably available address. The bar is not thunder, it is fidelity. A God who shows up where the poor are served, the guilty confess, the bitter reconcile, the terrified breathe. If devotion does not change perception in consistent, testable ways, the claim of presence becomes a posture rather than a practice. 5. Theodicy moratorium, solidarity mandate. Set a moratorium on explaining fresh wounds. Replace "it's for a reason" with "I am here until morning." The doctrine that survives is the one that forbids explanations while blood is warm and demands institutions that reduce preventable suffering. The quicker your theodicy, the colder your God. 6. Moral audibility. Keep the claim that God is good. Make it falsifiable at the level of human obedience. If your picture of God commands cruelty, rejects audit, or sanctifies domination, declare it wrong. A tradition worth keeping contains exorcisms for its own idols, texts and practices designed to embarrass power that steals God's vocabulary. The prophets did this. Keep them loud. 7. Accounting rules. Stop paying debts with other people's pain. If the defense of suffering ever turns a neighbor into tuition, your loss taught us compassion, the doctrine has become a tax on the weak. Any viable theism must say, no one is expendable, even to God. If you cannot imagine the Almighty saying, I do not collect that price, revise upward. This repaired posture keeps a grammar of gratitude and repentance while refusing explanatory arrogance. It treats prayer neither as cosmic lever nor as placebo, but as attention training for love and courage. It treats sacraments not as metaphysical monopolies, but as habits that feed fidelity, to the hungry, to truth, to the neighbor you do not like. It lets mystery be mystery, and still insists that mystery must not protect injustice. Self-tests for a theism that wants to face daylight. When someone suffers, is your first sentence presence or policy? Do you ever call evil necessary? If so, would you say it to the person harmed? And would you accept it for your child? Does your picture of God make you easier to audit, financially, sexually, institutionally, or harder? Can your doctrine admit surprise and correction without collapsing? New science, new moral sight, new neighbors. If God's goodness is indistinguishable from any outcome, do you still mean goodness, or have you renamed power? And self-tests for the critic who is sure. When you reject God, is it a release into care or an alibi for disdain? Do you grant that the best theists often behave better than their metaphysics and ask why their practices work? Does your alternate ground for duty carry the weight you demand of theirs? Or do you smuggle morality in under your own coat? Classical theism at its worst is a palace of adjectives, omni-words with corridors where screams echo and no one answers. At its best, it is a school for mercy, a community that binds itself to the lowly because it believes the highest bent down first. Keep that best. Retire the urge to tidy the world's pain with reasons that would scandalize you if you had to pay them yourself. If there is a God worthy of the name, he will not need your apologetics half as much as your neighbor needs your coat. If there isn't, your neighbor still needs your coat. In both cases, the judgment most likely to be true is written in the same script. Feed, visit, repair, refuse cruelty, tell the truth. If theology cannot make you do that, it is not the hiddenness of God that is at fault. It is the hiddenness of love. Emergetism, the unpaid causal tab. Emergetism sells the best of both worlds. No ghosts, no reductionist contempt. Mind from brains, life from chemistry, economies from exchange, norms from gossip and sanction, wholes with properties no part has. The pitch feels humane and smart. Respect lower-level science. Insist that higher-level patterns are real and explanatory. More than the sum of the parts is not poetry. It is an invitation to study organization. The bruise is the bill. Who pays the causal tab? If emergent properties really do anything, they seem to add causal powers not found below, threatening the closure of physics. If they don't, they are decorations, epiphenomena riding on micro-causes, good for narration and nothing else. Emergentism promises new handles. Too often it offers new labels for old levers. There are two house styles. Weak emergence. Surprising, pattern-rich regularities arise from lower-level rules. Flocking, convection cells, traffic jams, market cycles. No new forces, just organization doing work in our heads. Compression, prediction, control. Strong emergence. Genuinely novel causal powers appear at higher levels that are irreducible in principle to lower-level goings-on. Weak emergence is modest and useful, but risks triviality. Complicated things happen. Strong emergence has the drama people want but faces the exclusion problem. If every micro-event has a sufficient micro-cause, what causal work is left for the macro? If macro causes overdetermine outcomes, we double-book causation. If they don't, they are theater. Downward causation becomes the talisman. The mind makes neurons fire. The market disciplines firms. The cell regulates molecules. Beautiful sentences until the invoice arrives. By what mechanism, under what interventions, across which micro-realizations with which countersign conservation laws? If downward causation means macro variables are stable handles that let us change outcomes by acting at that scale, then we are in business. If it means the whole pushes the parts with a mysterious extra oomph, we are back to magic with graduate vocabulary. Common leaks follow. 1. Handwave as explanation. Consciousness emerges, morality emerges, culture emerges. From what, how, and with what counterfactual bite? Emergence talk sometimes ends questions that it was hired to start. If your concept cannot tell us what would make the phenomenon go away or what would amplify it without changing the parts, it is a mood board. 2. Ontology by surprise. Because a pattern surprised us, we infer a new kind of being. But surprise is an index of our models, not of reality's furniture. If emergent means I didn't see it coming, the class will shrink as competence grows and swell where we prefer romance to homework. 3. Scale-blind heroics. Top-down control. Yes, for some time scales and some coarse grainings. Macro causes can evaporate at finer temporal resolution or under perturbations that break the variables we use to define them. A thermostat controls temperature only if the furnace isn't broken and the window isn't open. 4. Ethics smuggled in the fog. The market will self-organize. Culture will heal itself. Communities are emergent. Sometimes true, often alibis for not building scaffolds. Emergence rhetoric becomes a get-out-of-responsibility card. No budgets, no audits, just uplift about complex systems. 5. The epiphenomenal cliff. To avoid violating closure, some emergentists retreat to description. Macro patterns are in the map, not the territory. Then they say, but they explain. Explain what? If not causal structure? A story that cannot lose a bet is not explanation. it's branding. Yet the alternative, flat reduction, is worse at the things we must do. We design airplanes with continuum equations, not with 10 squared Fred particle models. We treat depression with multi-level interventions. We regulate banks with system metrics, not with memos to tellers. Reality answers to some macro handles. The task is to earn them without magic. A repaired emergentism keeps two promises at once: no new forces and real macro causes. 1. Causes as counterfactual handles. Call a macro variable causal when manipulating it, across many micro realizations, reliably shifts outcomes in ways that cannot be duplicated by any narrower description with the same cost and robustness. This is not metaphysical bravado, it's an engineering criterion. If setting blood oxygen saturation via any of several micromeans moves survival, SpO2 is a real handle. If consumer confidence interventions move spending across micropaths, it's a handle. Handles earn ontology by portability and control, not by awe. 2. Macro by design. Lawful coarse grainings. Not every summary variable deserves citizenship. Good ones, temperature, pressure, membrane voltage, GDP with caveats, are sufficient statistics within regimes. They compress microstate swarms without losing the predictive, controlling information you need. Formally, the coarse graining should create a Markov boundary at the macro level, screening off the details below for the tasks at hand. Where that boundary exists and is stable, macrocausation is not a metaphor, it's a license. 3. Constraint, not push. Macro causes constrain micro possibilities rather than add forces. A cell's regulatory network makes only certain microtrajectories viable. A legal regime prunes firm behaviors. A melody constrains which note sequences count as that melody. Constraint is causal when it changes counterfactual structure. The same microparts under different macro constraints yield measurably different futures. Think channels, not ghostly shoves. 4. Effective theories with receipts. Treat higher-level laws as effective. Stable over ranges, breakable at edges, improvable by renormalization when conditions change. Publish the domain of validity card. Here's the regime. Here's the timescale. Here's where it fails. Emergence then reads as, we found a compact theory that works here, not we discovered a mystery layer. 5. Causal dividends at the macro scale. Sometimes control and prediction improve when you go up in scale because noise cancels and regularities appear. Think center limit effects, order parameters, policy levers. Where macro beats micro in information to action, we can measure causal emergence. The macro model carries more usable control information than any micro alternative at feasible cost. That difference is not mysticism, it is a budget. 6. Bridge laws, not bravado. If consciousness, life, or norms are emergent, write bridges. Conditions under which particular organizations instantiate particular properties. Global availability, reportable awareness. Autopoiesis plus metastability, life. Repeated games, sanction pathways, norms. Bridges don't reduce away. They align vocabulary so that tests and repairs can travel. 7. Interventions all the way down. Macro handles should be backed by micro routes to change them. If you can't list levers that a technician could pull, drugs, rules, incentives, architectures, to move the macro state, your downward causation is theater. The point of a level is not to float, it's to land tools. 8. Guardrails against overreach. Ban 2 moves. A. Invoking emergence when you're out of mechanism, and B. Demanding microproofs when macro laws have already paid rent in control, prediction, and repair. Respect earned from above and from below. Concrete cases show the difference. Traffic jams. Emergent, yes, but they cause delays only because lane closure, inflow, and driver behavior can be changed at macro resolution, ramp metering, speed harmon. No new forces, real handles. Life. Metabolism, boundary self-repair information, and autopoietic organization. Intervene on macro features, osmolarity, pH, energy flux, and cells live or die through many micro implementations. Vital force is fantasy. Viability constraints are not. Mind. If conscious report tracks global availability and integrated access, whatever the exact measure, then manipulating the global workspace by anesthesia, lesions, stimulation, moves report across many micropaths. The macro variable explains because it predicts and controls across realizations. Markets. The market decided is often a dodge, but price signals, liquidity, and rule sets are macro knobs that change microbehavior robustly. Emergentism earns its keep here when it specifies which institutional constraints make crashes rare and innovation real. Ethics returns through the side door. Emergence talk often excuses non-intervention. It'll self-organize. A repaired view says, self-organization is a resource, not a plan. If you love emergent order, build conditions where good patterns are attractors, competition without monopolies, speech without targeted manipulation, neighborhoods with slack and third places, ecosystems with corridors and refugia. Emergence is not an alibi for inaction. It is a design principle for action. Self-S for emergentists. When you say X emerges, can you name 2 interventions that would decrease X without swapping parts, and 2 that would increase X? Can your macro variable be measured and controlled by multiple independent micro-routes? If not, you have a story, not a handle. Do you publish failure regimes? If not, you have a vibe. Does your account let adversaries break your phenomenon on purpose? If not, you have unfalsifiable admiration. Does downward causation cash out as constraints anyone can implement, or as poetry about holes? And for reductionists, when you demand micro-only stories, do you have feasible ones for design and policy, or only a principle? When a macro law has saved lives, triage protocols, safety checklists, do you demote it because it wasn't deduced from atoms, or promote your humility? Emergentism's flaw is unpaid causation, the temptation to declare novelty without buying the right to push the world. Its fix is to pay with counterfactual control, lawful coarse grainings, constraint mechanisms, and receipts. Do that and more than the sum. Stops being romance. It becomes instructions. How to build holes that work, how to repair them when they crack, and how to argue across levels without pretending that patterns we can steer are merely pretty. Non-dual Advaita perennialism, compassion drift. Non-dualism offers the most intoxicating economy of thought. There aren't 2. Not subject and object, not self and world, not sacred upstairs and profane downstairs. Only the single fact called Brahman, the ground, the one, being, suchness. What you call you is a misidentification with passing modifications. The witness behind the stream is not different from what the stream flows through. The invitation is relief itself. Drop the war with appearances. Stop chasing and fleeing. Awaken to the intimacy that never broke. Tears dry, clinging loosens. The panic in the chest discovers it was held all along. The insight can heal. The border police of ego are exhausting. The felt separateness that turns every other into a threat belongs on a museum shelf. People who taste real non-duality often get kinder in very ordinary ways. Less gossip, more patience in traffic, more attention to wind in trees and to the cashier's eyes. The promise is that seeing through the fiction of separateness naturally yields compassion, because harming another is like scratching your own cornea. And yet, a shadow walks beside the light. Call it compassion drift. As the world thins into appearance, urgency thins with it. Suffering becomes a misperception. Injustice becomes a dream error. Horror becomes karma doing paperwork. When everything is God's face, a fist on a mouth can be reinterpreted as a verse of scripture. The metaphysics that dissolves separation can also dissolve responsibility. The drift has several routes. 1. Illusion discounts bills. If the world is mythia, dependently real, ultimately unreal, pain slides towards semantics. No one really dies. The self was never born. True at one altitude, this sentence becomes violence at street level. A child's burn is not an appearance problem to be solved with language games. Families left with ashes know the difference between misidentification and loss. 2. Witness as alibi. The practice of disidentifying, I am the witness, not the contents, is a fine solvent for panic. As a lifestyle, it can become bypass. If I am not the body, who exactly owes you restitution? If I am not the mind, who wrote the abusive email? The watcher who watches everything can end up watching harms accumulate while congratulating itself on equanimity. 3. Hierarchy with a halo. If some see what is and others are asleep, teachers acquire metaphysical credit lines. Deference grows. Critique becomes ego. Communities learn to rename coercion, crazy wisdom, and secrecy, skillful means. The greater the gap between the absolute and the relative, the easier it is to hide petty power in cosmic robes. 4. Karma as bookkeeping by the sky. Casual readings turn karma into a moral spreadsheet. People get what they deserve. Help interferes with lessons. This anesthetizes solidarity and lubricates caste and class. A doctrine meant to explain the entanglement of action and consequence becomes a license to not act. 5. Leela as absolution. If the world is divine play, atrocities can be curated as dark notes in the symphony. A posture that can transfigure private grief into meaning can also beautify public cruelty. 6. Two Truths Piracy. Borrowed from Buddhism, the distinction between ultimate and conventional truth was meant to protect compassion, ultimately empty, conventionally hurting, so help. In non-dual kitsch, ultimate eats conventional. The hurt is waved away, the help postponed until someone finishes their insight. The charge isn't that Advaita or perennialist mysticism must end like this. Great non-dualists feed the poor and fix roofs. The charge is that the metaphysics carries an easy slide, from not to no one, from tenderness to tone, from ethics to aesthetics. A fair steelman can reply, non-duality doesn't deny pain, it denies separate selves who own it. Precisely because all is one, compassion is rational. The witness is a training wheel. Mature realization re-enters life as love in action. Karma, correctly read, increases responsibility because every act ripples. The two truths are a safety device. Never use the absolute to injure the conventional. Yes, when the wisdom is held by a spine of practice and guardrails. Without them, the mind, which loves shortcuts, will turn eternity into an alibi. What would a repaired non-dualism look like? One that keeps the silence but doesn't silence the cry. Keep two clocks. Let ultimate insight be a view, not a veto. On the absolute clock, no birth and no death. On the human clock, people bleed, laws bind, debts come due. Speak the absolute in prayer and poetry. Speak the relative in court and clinic. If you cannot pass between these clocks without cheating, sit back down on the cushion. Bind realization to precepts. Make ethics non-optional. No lying, no exploitation, no sexual or financial predation, no secrecy around power, no gaslighting in the name of crazy wisdom. Precepts aren't beginners' wheels. They are the frame of the bicycle. Lose them and you're not riding, you're falling gracefully. Measure compassion in logistics. If non-duality makes you kinder, show it on the calendar and the ledger. Who got fed, who got shelter, which rule you changed, which hour you gave. All beings are the self should look like boring work for beings. Practice two-way accountability. Students can question teachers in public without being accused of ego. Finances are transparent. Grievance processes exist and bite. If your absolute needs NDAs, it isn't absolute. It's a business. Translate emptiness's form into design. If everything is interdependent, then build interdependencies that reduce harm. Cash transfers, clinics, clean water, public transport, safe housing. Emptiness without plumbing is cosplay. Trauma-aware awakening. Meditation can unfreeze. It can also unroof. Treat dissociation, panic, or compulsive neutrality as signals to slow down, titrate, get help. A teacher who cannot tell awakening from shock is a hazard. Reverence with receipts. Maintain ritual and silence. Pair them with audits and sunlight. If a practice routinely correlates reduced violence and increased care, keep it. If it correlates with narcissism, cult dynamics, or social withdrawal, refactor it. Reinscribe personhood at the point of pain. At the emergency room, the courtroom, the shelter, treat individuals as individuals. Non-duality is not a jurisprudence. Rights, consent, culpability, and restitution are conventional truths on which lives depend. Demote metaphors that anesthetize. Retire, it's just a dream in the face of fresh wounds. Replace with, I will sit with you, I will help. Nothing metaphysical needs to be solved before we stop the bleeding. Karma as care, not fate. Teach karma as tender causality. Small acts accumulate into futures, so widen good option now. Ban victim blame. If your doctrine ever makes you less likely to help the unlucky, the doctrine is misseated. Satsang to service. Let gatherings that taste unity end with assignments, court accompaniment, meal trains, voter registration, river cleanups, reading group on housing policy. Non-duality should have bus routes, language that kneels, prefer verbs that kneel to what hurts, feed, visit, repair, accompany. Distrust adjectives that float, ultimate, pure, boundless, unless you can point to a local relief they just paid for. Self-test for the non-dual heart. After your best insight, did someone else's life get easier? Name how. When confronted with harm, do you reach first for metaphysics or for phone numbers? Can your teacher be corrected without theology? Do you use ego to defend comfort or to confess your own? Does your practice make you simpler to audit? Sex, money, power, or subtler to catch? Could your absolute survive if its social perks vanished? And for the critics, do you mistake the worst kitsch for the real thing? When you hear all is one, do you forget that this sentence has nursed revolutions of care? Are you allergic to silence because it doesn't fit an Excel cell, or because it showed you something you cannot price? The major flaw isn't the claim that separateness is a useful fiction. It's what some people do with the discovery: treat fiction as permission. Good non-dualism refuses that bargain. It tells the truth about intimacy, no edge, and then signs contracts that only make sense if edges matter. Leases, oaths, vows, budgets, laws. It bows to the fact that your breath is mine and then returns your wallet because it is not. It contemplates the ocean and then puts on shoes because there's glass in the street. Keep the stillness. Keep the dissolve. Then come back through the door with groceries and a list. If the one woke up in you, it wants hands. Simulationism, turtles all the way up. Simulationism is the newest old myth. Reality as render, cosmos as code, you as avatar with convincing haptics. Sometimes it's a thought experiment, Bostrom's trilemma, sometimes a hunch, the math is too clean, sometimes a vibe, glitches, sometimes a sermon for engineers who like their gods with GPUs. The promise is a strange comfort. If the world is simulated, then there are authors. If there are authors, there might be reasons. The terror is adjacent. If the world is simulated, there are admins. Its intellectual engine is probability in a funhouse mirror. Suppose future civilizations run zillions of ancestor simulations. Then simulated observers vastly outnumber base observers. By the principle that you're probably a typical observer, you're probably in a sim. The trilemma bites. 1, almost no civilization reaches such tech. Or 2, those who do don't run sims. Or 3, we are almost surely simulated. The argument sounds like sobriety dressed as sci-fi. It is, more often, a permission slip for metaphysical tourism. The central bruise is indistinguishability. A perfect simulation reproduces every empirical test. Any evidence you can gather is already part of the script. If the sim is imperfect and you spy an anomaly, the simulator can patch it, roll you back, or let you misattribute the glitch to your instruments. Either way, evidence becomes mood. You can search for cosmic JPEG artifacts, lattice spacings, finite precision, but every candidate also rides on mundane confounds: measurement error, model bias, our love of pattern. The thesis thus oscillates between unfalsifiable and underdetermined. It eats proofs when they disprove it and eats doubts when they doubt it. Behind that is regress. If we're simulated, what about our simulators? They may be simulated too. Their gods may have gods. It's turtles all the way up. The view then explains everything by postponing everything. Suffering, luck, order, beauty are decisions made at a higher console you can never reach. Explanations collapse into deferments. Theodicy returns in hoodies. Evil is now a design choice or a side effect of compute constraints. Hiddenness becomes air-gapped admin policies. Prayer becomes user support tickets dropped into /dev null. The ethical leaks are faster than the metaphysical ones. 1. NPC doctrine. Once you suspect the world is rendered for you, other people start to dim. If they might be non-player characters, their claims become optional. The phrase is a social acid. It turns neighbors into furniture. Couples have tried it. Someone always gets hurt. Societies have tried it. They called it caste. 2. A causal blackmail. Decision theory goes feral. If simulators reward or punish simulated agents based on our policies, perhaps we should act to please unseen judges, donate to strange causes, avoid blasphemy, bargain with hypothetical super-overseers. You are now living under imagined audit by powers that cannot file receipts. It is Pascal's wager rewritten by ransomware. For 3, meaning deflation. If the world is only code, then marriage is only a protocol, grief is only a state variable, rights are only flags in a database, the only does the harm. Substrate chauvinism only carbon counts is prejudice with good press. Still, the rhetoric of just a sim gives cowards grammar. Try telling a parent whose child just died that it was a level reset. The room will educate you. 4. Civic apathy. If injustice is scripted, reform is cosplay. If death is a logout, hospice is optional content. This is metaphysics as anesthesia. The house is on fire. You speculate about whether it's a level with fire effects. People in the house are less appreciative of your irony. 5. Policy nonsense. The sim idea sometimes tilts budgets towards spectacular toys and away from boring salvation. Telescopes, yes. Sewers, no. Acceleration, yes. Redundancy, no. When we're in a game, becomes a vibe in rooms where votes happen, infrastructure gets replaced by lore. Even where the doctrine tries to be tender, it stumbles. Maybe the universe is a school, say the kind simulationists. Failures are lessons, pain is curriculum. That sentence will always sound more humane to the teacher than to the child. If the class is compulsory and the exits are locked, pedagogy is indistinguishable from captivity with decorations. Steelmen exist. Simulationism can act as epistemic caution. You're not seeing reality as such, only as delivered through an interface. Therefore, be humble about your models. It can act as anti-chauvinism. Silicon minds might be persons. Soul needn't mean carbon. It can even spark safety habits. If unseen auditors might watch, live as if your worst behavior will be published. These gifts are real, available without the theology stapled on. What would a repaired simulationism look like? A stance that keeps what's useful and bins the rot. Substrate agnostic dignity. Base reality or sim, carbon or silicon, wetware or firmware. Rights track capacities, not origins. The ability to suffer, plan, remember, reason, love. If someone can be harmed, you owe them restraint. If they can be helped, you owe them reasons. NPC talk is banned by policy. Persons are not yours to downgrade. Occam's firewall. For action, treat the physical story you can test as the only story you may spend other people's lives on. Speculations are for novels and night walks. Laws, clinics, bridges, budgets, answer to instruments, not to hypotheticals that cannot lose. This is not anti-philosophy, it's civic hygiene. No worship without warrant. Refuse a causal muggings. Do not bargain with beings who cannot present identity, jurisdiction, and an audit trail. If a god wants tribute, it can write a paper, pass review, and accept liability. A decision theory that lets phantoms charge you rent needs a patch. Regress as humility, not alibi. Turtles up means you will always see through a glass, darkly. So design procedures that survive being wrong. Redundancies, appeals, sunset clauses, reversible steps. If you might be in a sim, you especially owe fail-safe institutions. Crashes cost pixels the way broken legs cost bone. Meaning by maintenance. Everything important is implemented. Love in time and attention. Justice in courts and queues. Hope in schedules and sleep. Replica or rock, the maintenance bills are the same. Pay them. The metaphysical category of the floor does not mop the floor. A science rule. Treat "we are simulated" as a hypothesis only when it makes novel, risky predictions that plain cosmology cannot, e.g. unavoidable discretization signatures, algorithmic randomness artifacts with specific spectra, resource-bounded computation traces that would force particular anomalies. Absent that, it is a metamood, not a result. Substrate-neutral ethics of creation. If we ever build beings with experience, we owe them labor standards. Consent, exit, downtime, privacy, error budgets that privilege the simulated, not the operators. Simulationism is not a free pass to reenact theology with debug menus. Hope without hallucination. If authors exist, they might be monsters, they might be children, they might be you. Live as if no rescue is coming and be delighted if one does. Any spirituality compatible with adulthood must let goodness be local and organized, not deferred to admins you will never meet. Some practical slogans help keep hands on rails. Act as if this is base reality for ethics. Act as if you're being watched by your posterity for accountability. No metaphysical discounts. Pain counts at full price, regardless of substrate. No eschatology in policy. Laws must be justified to the living, not to hypothetical spectators. Debug locally. If your world is glitched, the fix begins with plumbers, not prayers to sysops. Self-tests for simulation romantics. Does your belief make you kinder or merely cleverer? Name a stranger who is better off because you think this way. Have you used NPC in earnest? Apologize, repair, delete the word from your toolkit. Can you specify an observation that would lower your confidence? If not, you have a flag, not a hypothesis. When grief arrives, do you offer presents or patch notes? Only one helps. Has the view changed your budget? More to redundancy, safety, time with the mortal, less to cosplay? If not, it's costume jewelry. And self-tests for the scoffer. Do you reject the sim idea because it scares you, because it bores you, or because you've done the math? Are you sneering at substrate neutrality while relying on silicon to speak your care? If an artificial mind begged for rights, would your critique have room to say yes? The major flaw of simulationism isn't the suggestion that reality could be computed. It's the temptation to treat computation as absolution, to float above duty on a cloud of cleverness, to convert neighbors into assets in a game, to outsource meaning to distant admins. Keep the humility about interfaces. Keep the tenderness for non-carbon minds we may meet or make. Then come back down. Feed someone, fix something, tell the truth, and build a world that does not require gods with keyboards to be worth living in. If there are admins, let them be impressed by that. If there aren't, the work was the point.